41. Full Moon Day. The Weasley brothers, Seamus, Neville, and the few others who knew the inside story kept silent about Loren. Dumbledore never explained the precise method used to capture Peter Pettigrew to the Ministry, and the Ministry never pressed him. No one dared to force Dumbledore into areas he didn't wish to discuss. Fudge, suddenly enjoying a measure of fame, was in a good mood and didn't look for trouble. The Daily Prophet had no way of knowing the truth, and with Dumbledore quietly smoothing things over, everyone else stayed unified in their silence. Dumbledore hadn't discussed the matter with Loren, but they had reached a tacit agreement. Dumbledore's priority was to protect his student, and Loren preferred to keep his life out of the public eye. That afternoon, Loren didn't drag Hermione into dueling practice. Frequent drills might trigger his corrective aptitude, and besides, such repetition was grueling work. Instead, he summarized and generalized what he had learned, planning to consult Flamel in the evening for a more theoretical understanding of the shield charm. He wrote and drew on paper, listing spells, grouping them, selecting which applied, and trying to build his own combat system. The final spell that won a duel wasn't the point. Whether Expelliarmus, Stupefy, a Bat Bogey Hex, or even Avada Kedavra, a single effective hit could neutralize an opponent. What mattered first were defense, evasion, and control. From the spells he could access, Loren divided his system into 3 categories: defense, control, and attack. Defensive charms centered on the shield charm, Protego, and finite incantatum. Control charms included Impedimentia, Incarcerus, and Petrificus Totalis. Offensive spells ranged from Diffindo to Expelliarmus and Stupefy. Once these were mastered, improving combat sense in the virtual dueling room would make everything click. There was no immutable formula. Loren planned to expand and refine his system as he grew, later adding things like apparition techniques, sectum sempra, or even fiendfire. Masters like Dumbledore or Grindelwald could pick the perfect spell in a heartbeat and often used transfiguration to create overwhelming problems for their enemies. Loren still had a long way to go. Except for the shield charm, he could practice the rest on his own and aimed to master them within a couple of months. That evening, he told Flamel his ideas. Flamel considered them for a moment. For a student, that's perfectly sufficient. You always have to start with the basics. He didn't mention footwork, breathing, or rhythm. Those were as important as anything in combat, but Flamel knew Loren would understand once he used the dueling room more. Loren asked for more details about Protego, and by comparing his daytime memories with the corrected content he had, he pulled together a more complete method of use. Sunday, the full moon. Loren woke listless and unsteady. Since he'd learned that Bates was a werewolf, nothing had made him this anxious. When he'd lived near Grandpa Bates, he knew the routine. On full moon nights, Bates would climb the mountain and lock himself away. There was nothing Loren could do for him then, but being nearby made him feel steadier. Now distance separated them in more than just miles, and as the moon rose, Loren couldn't settle. "Are you all right?" Ron noticed Loren eating slowly, unlike him at all. Loren forced a smile. "I'm fine." Ron suspected otherwise. Loren was usually the most lively eater in the room, and yesterday he'd polished off a whole steak for breakfast. Ron was about to press the matter when Hermione gave him a warning shake of the head. After eating, Harry tugged Ron off to the Quidditch pitch, and Hermione stayed beside Loren, studying his face. "Come with me," she said, tugging Loren out of the courtyard and up a different staircase, following the railing until they were beneath the Hogwarts clock tower. There was an attic hollowed out under the bell where they could see Black Lake, the Forbidden Forest, and most of the castle's turrets. Hermione sat with her feet dangling over the ledge. A chill wind swept through the space. The morning mist clung low, and the orange-red sunrise cast a gentle light. "Sometimes I come up here to clear my head," Hermione said. "The open view helps." Loren guessed she meant it was a refuge from the tensions with her roommates. Then she surprised him. "Actually," she interrupted, "I knew all along." "Knew what?" Loren asked. "At Flourish and Blots," she blurted. "There are loads of books on magical creatures, goblins, trolls, vampires. But you didn't look at any of those. You went straight for that book about werewolves." She did notice that then. "I read some bits about werewolves," Loren said quietly. "They change during the full moon and lose themselves. It's a painful thing. Hermione's voice dropped. Thinking of Grandpa Bates's lined face, Loren fell silent. And you asked me to practice charms. Those were signs, Hermione went on. Her eyes were glossy. Tonight is the full moon. You must be feeling awful. Her emotion intensified. Something felt wrong. Loren, we should go find a professor, she whimpered. It took him a moment to realize she'd assumed he was the werewolf. Seeing her on the verge of tears, Loren hurried to explain. You're overthinking it. I'm not a werewolf. Hermione stopped, blinking. Her hand froze mid-wipe. Huh? Loren told her that Grandpa Bates was the werewolf, and he'd been off his appetite because he worried about Bates. Heat rose to Hermione's face. This was mortifying. She had jumped to conclusions and dragged him up here to say such foolish things. I'm sorry. I guessed wrong, she stammered, scrambling to her feet as if she could escape the embarrassment. No, I'm glad you care, Loren said, holding her hand and offering a handkerchief. At first, he'd been surprised by Hermione's attentive observation and sharp deductions. The result had been wrong, but having someone notice and worry about you felt strangely comforting. After that awkward moment passed, they talked about more ordinary things. Hermione's roommates, the constant skirmishes between Filch and Peeves, and the tree below heavy with orange-red berries. The view and the conversation eased the tightness in Loren's chest, if only a little. 42. Let's go on a night stroll. Loren sat by the window, staring at the full moon. Since he discovered that Grandpa Bates was a werewolf, the sight of a full moon had taken on a new meaning. The others in the dorm had noticed Loren's low spirits and were whispering about it. Harry nudged Ron. What's wrong with Loren? Ron glanced at Loren furtively, as if sharing a secret. He's been like this since morning. He seems a little better now, though. Neville blinked, puzzled. Should we ask him? I think it's best not to bother him right now. Harry had been in that mood before. When he'd been at the Dursleys, he always wanted to be alone when he was down. Loren heard them and let out a long breath that seemed to lift some of the weight from his chest. He didn't want to go to bed yet, and he didn't want to go to Flamel's either. He needed to do something else. Let's go on a night stroll. Count me in. Seamus sprang up, suddenly fully awake. Say that, and I'm not tired anymore. Harry and Ron exchanged a look. Is he okay? Harry asked. He'll be fine, Ron said. So what now? For now, just go along with him. They reached a silent agreement and nodded. Harry added quickly, I want to see what Cerberus is guarding. Ron stared at Harry, eyes wide. You just wanted an excuse to go for a walk, didn't you? When Seamus heard the word Cerberus in Hogwarts, his excitement cracked into alarm. There's a Cerberus in Hogwarts Castle! Suddenly, the night stroll didn't seem so appealing. No one else paid much attention to his outburst. Of course, Loren agreed readily. There were still checkpoints below the Cerberus, he figured, so letting Harry know was harmless. Neville pulled the blanket up around his chin. He didn't approve of his roommates sneaking out, let alone poking around where a Cerberus was kept. But Loren seemed intent, and Neville didn't want to spoil his mood. You go. If you're not back by midnight, I'll go find a professor, he said at last. Seamus, timid by nature, but not willing to be left out, decided he wasn't going to miss this adventure. If he didn't take part now, he'd remain a background character forever. The four of them crept out of the common room. Loren and Harry walked in front, with Ron and Seamus bringing up the rear. Only a few candles flickered in the corridor, and the portraits spoke in hushed tones as if not to disturb anything. The gray stone walls seemed darker at night, and shadows felt ready to leap out at any moment. Seamus grinned so widely his gums showed. As they passed a suit of armor, a long axe clattered down and blocked their path. Ah! The sudden noise shattered the corridor's silence. Seamus screamed, startled. His heart thudded wild and loud. The others stiffened, frozen in the dim light, not daring to move. The portraits murmured disapprovingly. What are you lot doing wandering about at this hour? Someone hissed. Aren't you going to let people sleep? A ghost stepped out of the armor, nearly headless Nick. He laughed, a dry, cheerful sound. Ha! Caught you out on a night stroll. Harry sighed in relief. Darn it, Nick. You knew we were on a walk and still scared us. They'd known Nick for almost a month and were used to his teasing. Loren wondered if Nick had led Filch up here to catch them. Nick grinned. He's gone upstairs. He wanted to chat, but Harry didn't want any delay. They had to be back before midnight, so he tugged Loren along. "Goodbye, Nick. We've got things to do. See you later." Nick watched them go and muttered, "Rude kids." Seamus still hadn't quite recovered his composure. Ron hauled him along. "Don't worry. Someday we'll show him a thing or two." They reached the fourth-floor corridor and paused in front of the locked door. Loren waited for Harry and Ron to move. They'd been here before. They stood facing the door in silence. "Well, open the door." Seamus couldn't understand why they were hesitating. Harry and Ron looked awkward. Harry scratched his head. "Last time Hermione opened it for us with Alohomora, we don't know that spell." Loren made a sound of exasperation. Hermione and two useless boys. Seamus's eyes lit up. He had a charm he was sure would be perfect for opening doors. He fished out his wand. "I know a spell. It's just right for this." Loren snatched at his arm. "If that spells Portaberto, you'll set off fireworks and we'll be expelled." If Seamus set off Portaberto in here, an explosion and the Cerberus's barking would probably end their Hogwarts careers. Instead, Loren said quietly, "Alohomora." He'd learned it before term started. The iron lock clanged and the door swung open. "Well done, Loren," Ron said appreciatively. Harry pushed the door, then stopped dead. The three behind him noticed he'd frozen in the doorway, one hand gesturing awkwardly behind his back. "What are you doing?" "Go in," Seamus demanded, and shoved Harry forward. Ron and Loren followed. The sight inside stopped them cold. Dumbledore was in the room, placing food near a massive three-headed dog. In the corner stood the Mirror of Erised, familiar to Harry from before. Harry internally cursed Seamus for barging in. He'd wanted to keep this under wraps, but there was Dumbledore, calm and unbothered. The four of them stood dumbfounded in the doorway. Seamus looked on the verge of tears, of the joy and terror that collided when your one chance at adventure led straight into the headmaster's path. "Unexpected guests, come meet my friend." Dumbledore beckoned them over and introduced the dog. "This is Fluffy. I need him to guard something that must remain secret." Loren felt oddly serene. He suspected Dumbledore already knew they'd come and was waiting for them. He stepped forward confidently, offering a raw steak to the middle head and stroking Fluffy's fur. The creature leaned into him and began happily gnawing the meat. Seamus could hardly believe it. When he'd slipped out, he'd pictured apologizing to his mother if they were expelled. But here they were, petting the guard dog. Dumbledore smiled at the others. "When I was a student at Hogwarts, I went on night strolls too." Ron's and Seamus's eyes went wide. The greatest wizard of their age had also wandered the castle at night. "However," Dumbledore continued, "every rule at Hogwarts exists for a reason." They tensed up at that, but Dumbledore's tone softened. "Let us consider this our little secret." He gave them a playful wink, and Seamus burst into applause. Dumbledore produced various sweets from up his sleeve and offered them around. Loren introduced Ron and Seamus. "This is Ron Weasley, and this is Seamus, our roommate." "Oh, I know him. Arthur and Molly's son. We met briefly in the office," Dumbledore said cheerfully to Ron. "I hear you're very good at wizard's chess." "Yes," Ron beamed, a little embarrassed and very pleased. "Well, I just play a lot." Dumbledore turned to Seamus. "I hear you're talented with a certain kind of charms." Seamus went beet red and stammered. With Loren's prompting and Dumbledore's easy kindness, the conversation lightened and drifted. They chatted about friends, about Hermione, the clever know-it-all, and about Neville, shy and kind, and for a while the castle felt less ominous and more like home. 43. I have a deal with the potions master. Loren suspected the lower levels weren't ready yet, that Dumbledore was testing the waters. In the original story, the challenges had been tailored to Harry, Hermione, and Ron. Now it seemed the difficulty might be ramped up. Who cared? When the time came, he'd just keep his hands in his pockets and sit the whole thing out, he thought with a chuckle. Harry, standing beside him, said very little. His eyes kept drifting back to the Mirror of Erised. Before, when he couldn't see the mirror at all, he'd convinced himself he'd let go. Now that it was right there in the room, Harry couldn't help glancing toward the corner. Dumbledore noticed, and his voice softened. "Harry, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live." The words were gentle, but they landed like stones. The unusual hush that followed seemed to settle on everyone, and Dumbledore looked as if he expected them to reflect. Only Loren made a sound, popping a hazelnut chocolate into his mouth and chewing loudly. After a moment, Dumbledore smiled. Well, I think you should go back now. Otherwise, Neville might drag Professor McGonagall down here to trouble me later. Goodbye, Headmaster Dumbledore, they all replied, and rose hastily, drifting back to their dormitory in a daze. Is Headmaster Dumbledore criticizing me? Harry wondered, convinced his glances at the mirror had disappointed him. Loren yawned. Don't overthink it. If he meant to criticize you, he'd say it straight. Harry said nothing. His mind kept spinning. Seamus finally snapped back to reality. So that's what a night excursion is like? Exciting, but don't call me next time. First a surprised encounter with a ghost, then face-to-face with Cerberus, and finally Dumbledore himself. Exciting was the understatement of the year. Neville had definitely had foresight. The worst part was not even being allowed to boast about it. We still don't know what the Cerberus is guarding, Ron pointed out. The original purpose of the outing had been lost. Don't worry, Loren declared. There's still a chance. He didn't add the rest. Next time, you'll come on your own. Friday morning's potions class ended, and the weekend began. In the afternoon, Loren dragged Hermione to the room of requirement to practice the shield charm. Honestly, we should wait until we're older to learn this properly. You're wasting your time, Hermione complained as Loren pulled her along. Not this time. I've improved a lot. Loren protested, recalling their last match, the infamous 22-0. Hermione couldn't help smiling as she remembered it too. All right then, I'll listen, Mr. 22-0. What strange things are you saying? I don't understand. Mr. 22-0, Mr. 22-0. Hermione kept chuckling all the way to the room of requirement. They took positions. Ready, ready. Their voices echoed in the dueling space. Hermione could feel Loren's improvement. He was almost consistent with a protego. Most of the time, it simply canceled her spells, sometimes deflecting them in odd directions. All afternoon, Hermione repeated cast after countercast, and if proficiency levels mattered, her binding spell would have advanced several ranks. Petrificus totalis, Hermione flicked casually. At that instant, Loren had a strange intuition. He dipped the tip of his wand. Protego! Hermione's straight white jet of magic hit the tip of Loren's wand as if against an invisible barrier. The shield pulsed, and the linear spell rebounded, heading right back toward its source. It struck Hermione. Her body went rigid. She clutched at her sides, her face drained of color, and she crumpled, frozen. My shield charm can reflect, Loren whooped, forgetting decorum. Then he remembered the more important thing. He sat cross-legged beside her and looked into her glassy eyes. Ahem, Miss Granger. Loren Morgan has a matter to discuss with you. If you're willing, please move your eyes. Anger flared in Hermione's expression, clearly saying, Unpetrify me now or you're dead. Loren pretended to wait for an answer. Okay, Miss Granger agrees to converse with me. We'll make a deal. If you never mention the 22-0 incident again, I will unpetrify you. After giving her a moment to consider, he added, If you agree, just move your eyes. He didn't pause this time. Then we have a deal. He pronounced the agreement with all the self-importance of a negotiator. The cost of that deal? Hermione would make sure he paid for it by hitting him all the way back to the Great Hall later. That evening, it was time for Loren's weekly Friday appointment in the dungeons with Professor Snape. Loren had somewhat prepared himself for intimate dealings with toads, vipers, and lizards. He stepped into the office to find Snape grading papers. The professor didn't even look up when Loren entered. Answer me, Snape said. What is the function of knotgrass in Polyjuice Potion? It was on the reading list Snape had assigned. To form a connection with another person, Loren replied. And which magical creature corresponds to the behavior of a bicorn? A lean cow, Loren answered. The next few questions came from earlier texts on the list, books Loren had actually read, and he answered them all. Snape's tone softened a fraction. Loren Morgan, you are a calculating child. I merely handed out a reading list, and you treated it as an opportunity to ingratiate yourself. Snape leaned back as if the point were trivial. Loren didn't deny it. Silence would be the smarter option. You are very suited to Slytherin. It would develop your potential fully, Snape continued. I come from a Muggle family, Professor, Loren said evenly, and Gryffindor is a good house too. Snape let it go. Your information is up to date. The Wolfsbane potion is a recent development, and costly. He paused, stood, and led Loren toward the storeroom. I want you to learn some potions under my supervision. The ones you brew over time will be used to pay off your debt. Loren felt he was getting a good bargain. Personal instruction from the potions master was worth far more than a single Wolfsbane potion. I understand, Professor, he said readily. Brewing the Wolfsbane will take time. I will write to my acquaintance Damocles Belby. He has finished potions. Those expenses will be charged to you as well. Snape hauled over 2 boxes. Loren's knees went a little weak, but the boxes weren't what he'd expected. They contained flowers. Snape produced a pair of extremely fine tweezers. Tonight, Snape said, you will separate the stamens from these weeping flowers. Loren peered into the boxes. The blossoms were clustered like baby's breath, a dozen clumps, and each clump with 100 tiny blooms. He was to pluck out every stamen with tweezers? His eyes felt suddenly inadequate. Professor, isn't there a charm for this? Loren tried to plead. Snape answered without looking back. Weeping flowers are delicate. Even the smallest, inappropriate fluctuation of magic will ruin their medicinal value. Loren sighed and sat down to begin the tedious task. This is worse than extracting venom from a green-striped viper, he muttered. Snape walked away, unconcerned. Don't worry, you'll have the pleasure of meeting green-striped vipers later. Loren thought, I really want to smack myself twice. Dueling lesson. Dear Grandpa Bates, how have you been recently? I hope your full moon night last week was peaceful. You are so lucky to have met me. Headmaster Dumbledore of Hogwarts is a kind man, and with the help of the headmaster and Professor Snape, I obtained a magic potion that, if taken a week in advance, can help you keep your sanity when you transform on a full moon night. Heh, the downside is that it's unbearably bitter, and even a little sugar will ruin it. I hope your taste buds haven't gotten too sharp in your old age. The potion is enclosed with this letter. Everything is fine here at school. Don't worry. Loren. Loren wrote the letter as soon as he got back from Snape's office, planning to have Hanch send it out the next day. A week had passed since he last plucked ingredients in Snape's laboratory, and this time Snape hadn't made him handle any strange components. After testing Loren's potion knowledge, Snape had shown him how to brew a low-level potion and assigned him a 1-foot-long essay to hand in next week. And, most importantly, Snape had given him the Wolfsbane potion he'd been waiting for. The potion sat in a palm-sized bottle that didn't look appetizing at all. It was an oily purple that seemed poisonous. Up close, it smelled faintly of rotten, fermented eggs. Drinking it would take real resolve. If Grandpa Bates still had a sharp sense of taste, the potion would be almost as bad as turning into a werewolf. Glad to be done with potion chores and to have the Wolfsbane in his pocket, Loren was in a good mood. As for the essay, did they not realize how well a college student could pad their assignments? At least this one wouldn't need a plagiarism check. He put the letter away and flopped onto his bed. He tapped the dueling room icon in the magical book and was transported into the practice arena. The room was high-ceilinged and bare, no desks, chairs, or benches, making it feel empty and focused. Flamel, I think I can give it a try, Loren called. After a week of practice, he could cast the shield charm fluently. Flamel drifted down and landed in front of him, smiling. Before he finished speaking, his face blurred and reformed into a mirror of Loren's. There's no better way to understand yourself than to fight yourself. Flamel, wearing Loren's face, bowed. Loren felt awkward. Fighting himself was strange. Flamel cleared his throat, and his voice shifted to match Loren's too. Clear, young, a little boyish. I won't use any spells you don't know, and I'll match the power of your magic. Ready, Loren said. They bowed. Loren held his wand upright. The words of the shield charm were on the tip of his tongue. Flamel opened with a Lumos. Before Loren could think, he cast Protego. Lumos wasn't an attack, and it wasn't aimed at Loren, but the sudden burst of brilliant light blinded him for a moment. He turned his head and shut his eyes on reflex. He couldn't cast a full shield charm with his eyes closed. Only the tip of his wand offered any defense. Startled and protecting his face, he fumbled the charm and canceled it. In that instant, he knew he was vulnerable and rolled forward and to the right, but Flamel was already ahead of him. Rictus Sempra, he cried, a knockback jinx. The jinx struck Loren like a punch to the chest. He felt himself knocked backward through the air and hit the ground hard. Flamel withdrew his hand and chuckled. As naive as a child. Loren clutched his chest and tried to catch his breath. He rolled his eyes. I am a child. It was humiliating. He had thought he could block 1 or 2 spells with Protego, but he hadn't lasted 2 moves. A single Lumos had forced him to drop his shield, and a knockback jinx had finished him. Flamel began to lecture him in that dry, clinical tone. Don't expect to block every incoming charm, he said. Dodge when you can. Use countercharms if you can. The last resort is to take the hit, never be a target. Loren's imagined dueling was childish and turn-based. One spell, the other defends. In practice, dueling was a battle of tempo. Some wizards dictated the pace, unleashing a barrage of charms to keep an opponent off balance until the opponent made a mistake. A skilled wizard could cast 2 or more spells in the time it took the other to cast one. Again, Loren said. He stood, exhaled, and his eyes lit with excitement. The lesson began for real, and Loren came away disheveled. After the Lumos trick had spoiled his first shield, he learned to be wary, but Lumos wasn't just an opening move. It could be slipped between other spells to break his sight and timing. Again, Flamel would say, and they went at it again. The flame charm constricted Loren's movement area. An unintended softening charm made a tile slick under his feet, so he stepped on it and lost balance. With only the 9 spells from the first-year textbook, Flamel devised endless combinations. He interfered, controlled, and disrupted Loren until Protego was useless, and the finishing move was always a plain knockback jinx. After each bout, Flamel pointed out Loren's mistakes, but refused to give him the exact countermeasures. Loren had to find them himself, step by step, through repeated knockbacks. At first, he could barely maintain a shield. Gradually, he began to surprise Flamel sometimes, delaying the barrage. He went from surviving a spell or 2 to holding out for minutes at a time. After an indeterminate stretch of time, Flamel finally said, "That's enough for today. 1 step at a time, Loren." Loren was reluctant. He'd been holding his breath. Sure, he'd eventually break through and land a 10-spell knockback chain of his own. His chest throbbed as if it had been trampled by a horse. He breathed a relieved sigh. At least this was a simulation, so whatever bruises he'd taken here wouldn't carry over to reality. Next time, he'd be fresh again. Flamel looked quite satisfied. Making that much progress on the first try showed Loren had excellent combat awareness. More important was his stubborn will. Some people, after repeated beatings, shrank back and became overly cautious. A true fighter couldn't afford to be conservative. 45. Potions, October 23rd, Wednesday. It was the day first-years learned to use telescopes to observe the night sky, learning star names and the orbits of planets. They said much magic was tied to astrology. Loren noticed the moon was just past full, with a faint, almost unnoticeable blemish. Last night had been the full moon, so Bates should already have tried the wolfsbane potion. Loren wondered how well it had worked. He looked at the bright light of Mars, thought about Bates, and decided to write him a letter. Bates couldn't contact Loren first. He could only reply after Loren wrote. Hermione had also noticed the moon that day. She leaned in, patted Loren's arm, and said nothing. A warmth rose in Loren's chest, and he looked up at her with a smile. Hanch already sent the wolfsbane, he said. Bates shouldn't have had too hard a time last night. Loren had mentioned the wolfsbane potion back in the clock tower. Even though Loren seemed calm, Hermione stayed close and didn't bring up werewolves. She only talked about how pretty the moon was after the full and how bright Mars looked. On their way back to the common room, they ran into Professor Quirrell. The smell of fermented garlic grew stronger the closer he came. He was at one end of the corridor, and they could smell him from the other. Students slowed, hoping Quirrell would leave the floor before they passed. Fred and George shadowed him, fingers twitching to tangle his scarf, but they followed him all the way upstairs and never got the chance. Loren and the others had watched that scene many times. Everyone liked to imagine the twins embarrassing Quirrell. The front row of the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom was now always empty. Hannah Abbott had been unlucky enough to be late once and sat in the first row. After class, she couldn't walk and was sent to the hospital wing, white as a sheet. Madame Pomfrey put it down to something she'd eaten, but everyone blamed Professor Quirrell. Seamus agreed loudly, "If I hadn't been so strong, I'd have been in the hospital wing last time." Ron surveyed the situation and predicted that as Quirrell's scent worsened, the second row would soon be unusable too. "Watch," he said. "One day Quirrell will send everyone to the hospital wing." After that, students started arriving for defense an hour early. The unlucky ones who couldn't get seats squeezed into the back or pretended to be ill and went to the hospital wing. Percy wavered about reporting the whole thing to Professor McGonagall. He believed students shouldn't badmouth teachers, and in the end, did nothing. The Weasley twins promised they'd get Percy into the front row eventually so they could get close to Quirrell. Everything dragged on like that. The twins were crestfallen to see Quirrell slip out of their trap range. They saluted each other dramatically. "Soldier Fred, we've let this grave threat escape again." "Yes, Officer George." Then together, "I've got another brilliant idea." Loren and the others watched them perk back up and walk away, laughing. Hermione observed, "Have you noticed Professor Quirrell looks even paler?" Ron's eyebrows shot up. "A vampire must have found him and sucked him dry." Harry added with a grin, "He's fermented extra garlic in his scarf, hoping the vampire will stay away." The class burst into laughter. Seamus raised an objection. "Vampires in the wizarding world aren't afraid of garlic." Ron thought for a second and said, "Maybe he's trying to marinate himself so the vampire will be too disgusted to bite." That made everyone laugh again, even distracting Hermione. Loren laughed too, remembering the angle. Lord Voldemort and Quirrell seemed at their limits. Were they about to go into the Forbidden Forest hunting for fresh blood? Loren thought he should warn Hagrid. On Friday at lunch, Loren received a reply from Bates. The letter said that although Bates would be weak for a while after transforming, he could control himself, and even without going into a cave or locking himself up, he wouldn't harm anyone. Bates planned to start traveling, visit his hometown and perhaps other familiar places from his past. At the end, he teased Loren, suspecting Loren had deliberately made the potion so bitter that a 70 or 80-year-old man couldn't stand it. That line, "absolutely no sugar allowed," looked like a prank. "You'd better pray I don't catch you," Bates wrote, "or Grandpa will squeeze sheep bile into your mouth." Loren smiled at Bates's childishness. The wolfsbane potion seemed to have relieved him a great deal. Loren wholeheartedly approved of Bates' plan to travel. The werewolf problem had kept him in the mountains for decades. Now that he could be free, traveling was a blessing. That evening, completely unlike his usual approach, Loren went to Professor Snape's office in a good mood. "Come in," said the voice as he entered. Once again, he'd been detected without knocking. Loren suspected wizards of a certain level had an uncanny awareness. Professor Snape wasn't grading homework. He was answering a letter. Loren sat opposite and saw a graded short essay on the desk, the one-page piece he'd turned in last time. He'd padded the word count a little, but the main points were his, refined by Snape's lessons rather than copied from a book. The instructor's annotations were detailed. Loren had learned a lot reading them. One man writing a letter, another reading an essay. Silence settled in the office like a calm. Loren had accepted Professor Snape. Setting aside grievances from decades past and the horror of Voldemort and the Death Eaters, Snape was a qualified potions master. When Snape put the letter into an envelope, Loren set down his essay and thanked him, then mentioned Bates' good condition. Snape didn't reply at once. He looked at Loren with those steady eyes, less cold, less predatory than usual, and said, "Potions is a great subject. The fortunate glimpse glory, immortality, even the secret of rejuvenation. You happen to have a small, insignificant talent. Walk that path with reverence," he added. "It is all for yourself." Loren thought Snape was being his usual cryptic, melodramatic self, but the tone made him involuntarily reflect. Voldemort chose Horcruxes. Nicholas Flamel used the Philosopher's Stone. Could potions truly be a path to ultimate power? Before he could think it through, Professor Snape began the evening's lesson. Snape's words kept echoing in Loren's mind, turning his thoughts again and again to immortality. In the wizarding world, there were many paths to a long life, but none of them seemed perfect. Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady, had been murdered by the Bloody Baron and remained as a ghost at Hogwarts for over 1,000 years. Professor Binns could still lecture, assign homework, and take questions as if he were alive. The portraits were sentient. The Sorting Hat remembered centuries of students. Were these not forms of longevity, too? Horcruxes could be made, but the deaths surrounding their creators were often shrouded in mystery and speculation. Lord Voldemort had pushed the study of Horcruxes to extremes, and in the process had turned himself into something cruel and deranged. Nicholas Flamel's elixir of life preserved vitality, but left the body fragile. It was frightening to imagine that one careless gust of wind might be enough to break such a life to pieces. Everywhere he looked, there were routes to longevity, and everywhere those routes ended at some precipice. Loren suspected the closest thing to true immortality might be Dumbledore. The Dumbledores had Fawkes, a phoenix that could be reborn from ashes. Dumbledore's Patronus was a phoenix when most Patronuses were not even animals, and he was famously adept with fire and with spatial magic at Hogwarts, often aided, it seemed, by Fawkes. Could there be rebirth for a wizard like Dumbledore? He might have chosen death himself. Even in death, he could meet others in some ethereal way, which spoke to an extraordinary control over life and its edges. Flamel, can you make the elixir of life without the Philosopher's Stone? Loren asked, turning to the one man who might know. Nicholas Flamel sifted through his long memories carefully. There are many more legends about immortality, he said, and began to recount them: the golden apples of Norse myth, the peaches of immortality in the East, the holy grail of Christian lore, and the fountain of youth. Civilizations separated by oceans and mountains had strikingly similar tales. In some cases, the legends seemed to spring from the same prototype. Loren followed the thought. Maybe those ancient immortals traveled between civilizations and left those legends behind, he said, eyes bright. Before the age of exploration, only wizards could cross such barriers, Flamel pointed out. Loren's face lit up. So very early on, there were wizards who lived for a very long time and then used that time to explore the world. He spoke with excitement and certainty, just like Mr. Nicholas. And where are those ancient long-livers now? Loren asked next. Flamel did not press the matter further. He rose into the air and answered, "Who knows? Perhaps their longevity had flaws, and in the end they, too, could not escape death." Loren let the question lie. Tracing myth to truth could be frustrating and inconclusive. For now, he folded the conversation into a casual chat and set Snape's words aside. By day, Loren attended classes at Hogwarts. In the evenings, he practiced languages and dueling from the Book of Magic. Spent Fridays in Snape's office helping with potions and learning new preparations, and devoted weekends to the library, where he and Hermione devoured thick books together. It was a steady, simple routine, and time carried them quickly to Halloween Eve. House elves had been bustling in the kitchens all morning, and the corridors were filled with the warm, sugary smell of pumpkin, rich, thick, and mouth-watering. In charms, the scent seemed even stronger, and it did not help that the classroom was decorated for Halloween. Only Hermione managed to concentrate entirely on the lesson without faltering. "It smells so good," Loren blurted out more than once. Ron and Seamus both nodded, swallowing as the scent teased their appetites. Harry leaned across and whispered, "Neville's toad's gone missing again. Everyone look around, see if he's under the desks." It was a familiar ritual. Heads dropped in practiced unison as everyone scanned the floor. "Merlin's beard," Ron suddenly cried, mouth wide open. "I think I found him." They all followed his gaze and laughed. Leafu had hopped up onto the stool where Professor Flitwick stood, and, as if aiming for a bit of theater, launched himself toward the professor. Neville reddened and buried his face almost in his hands. Leafu made 2 hopeful hops and landed squarely on Flitwick's shoulder, then wriggled onto the professor's white beard. The classroom erupted into laughter, everywhere except Neville, who wished he could sink through the floor. Flitwick chuckled too. "It seems I am lecturing so well, even toads want to be close to me." The laughter grew louder. "Perfect timing for a demonstration," Flitwick announced, and smiling down at the toad perched on his shoulder, tapped his wand. "Wingardium Leviosa." Leafu rose into the air and circled the classroom, carried gently by the charm. "Cool," the students shouted. The toad passed students in turn and finally floated to a stop on Neville's desk. Flitwick looked at Neville kindly. "Keep an eye on your pet. If he starts running off again, you might have him fly a few more laps." Neville was too flustered to speak. He could only nod over and over. Flitwick returned to the lesson. "Let us continue with the levitation charm. It was invented by the 16th century wizard Giles Hobart." After the interruption, everyone was even more eager to learn. The pumpkin scent no longer distracted them. They leaned forward as Flitwick demonstrated again. He levitated a feather and sent a feather to each pair of students. Harry with Neville, Loren with Hermione, Ron with Seamus. "Remember the subtle wrist movement we practiced," he called, climbing a little higher on his stool and adding a small stack of books for emphasis. Swish and flick, and pronounce the spell properly," he added. Baruffio once misspoke a letter, said an S for an F, and ended up flat on the floor with a buffalo standing on his chest. After that series of gentle warnings, Flitwick let them begin. He watched closely as they practiced, ready to prevent any unexpected buffaloes or other mishaps from appearing in the classroom. Hermione had already mastered the charm and was idly watching the feather float. Harry, meanwhile, was thinking about the plot. Quirrell would be bringing the troll into the castle tonight, and figured Hermione probably wouldn't be going to the loo anymore. Hermione and everyone else had made up. They'd all gotten used to her habit of pointing things out. They'd laugh it off. Nobody would hold a grudge. So, she wouldn't be angry enough to hide in the bathroom and cry, and no one would be in danger that night. Hermione, who was on Harry's mind, wore a serious little face as she concentrated on the feather. She had practiced the charm before, and following Professor Flitwick's instructions carefully, made the feather tremble continuously after only a few tries. Ron tried a few times and then gave up. His wand was old. Whether it would perform the charm seemed a matter of luck, and today luck wasn't on his side. Hermione had already made the feather fly, and Professor Flitwick awarded Gryffindor 5 points for it. She leaned toward Ron, about to offer the correction everyone knew by heart. "It's Wingardium Leviosa." Not, but Harry cut in before it became a spat. He didn't want Hermione and Ron to start arguing. "It's the wand holding him back," he said. "It's not the spell or the movement." Hermione glanced at Ron's wand, saw its unicorn hair core, and apologized quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't notice your wand." "No, it's all right." Ron tried to sound fine, but a warm, sour sense of inferiority closed around him. He would much rather people thought he'd failed the levitation because of the spell than because of his wand. Everything he owned had been handed down by his older brothers. No new clothes, no new books, no new wand. Even his pet was a hand-me-down. At home, they laughed about it and got by. He never blamed his parents. They did their best, and he could feel their love. But at school, the comparisons stung. From the very start, on the train when he'd bought sweets and seen how different people's lives were, the feeling had taken root. At first, he told himself that Harry came from a famous family, so being better off made sense. Later, he realized it wasn't that everyone else was unusually rich. It was that his family really was poor. As a pure-blood Weasley, he thought they should be fine, but they were worse off than many Muggle kids. Compared to his brothers, he felt useless. Bill had top marks, Charlie was a Quidditch captain and a prefect, Percy was a prefect, Fred and George did well enough and charmed many professors despite their mischief. Ron had wanted to work hard and make the Weasley name proud, but at school, the wand problem made things hard. He joked and mugged around to hide how small he felt. He knew his friends didn't care, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. He couldn't tell his parents, couldn't tell his brothers, and he certainly couldn't share it with his friends, so he kept it to himself. Seamus was still at the feather. He noticed Ron's mood and thought it was from the charm failing, so he called out to cheer him up. "Hey, cheer up, mate. Watch me. This time I'll get it right." He shouted the spell loudly and jabbed his wand. "Wingardium Leviosa." Bang! The feather answered, by exploding into a little black puff of soot that smeared Seamus's face and splattered Ron too. Laughter rippled around the classroom. Ron's mood sank lower. At the Halloween feast, the ceiling above the Great Hall had been darkened by an enchantment. Storm clouds roiled, lightning forked across them, and thunder grumbled. Floating pumpkin lanterns cast an orange light that made everything look spooky. The tables were piled with sweets and roast meats and every kind of pumpkin dish imaginable. After smelling pumpkin for hours, everyone dug in hungrily. Harry scooped a spoonful of stewed pumpkin and put it in his mouth. The sweet, soft flesh dissolved on his tongue. Neville was busy eating and talking about charms. "I think Professor Flitwick is the best teacher," he said earnestly. No one argued. Seamus shoved an entire chicken leg into his mouth, a typical Seamus stunt, and then glanced around the table. "Have you seen Ron?" he mumbled through the meat. Harry swallowed and answered, "He said he wasn't feeling well and went to the toilet. He told me to go ahead." He hesitated, then added, "He didn't seem himself since charms. He looked down when we were playing this afternoon." Harry's hand froze over his plate. Of all the places Ron might be, the lavatories were the most likely. Then the doors at the end of the hall burst open. Quirrell ran in, wild-eyed, to the center of the room and shouted at the top of his voice, "Troll! In the dungeons! There's a troll in the dungeons!" He didn't get any further. He collapsed, fainting on the spot. Screams filled the hall. First years bolted for the exits and chaos rippled through the tables. "Silence!" Dumbledore's voice amplified. He ordered the prefects to marshal their houses back to the dormitories while he sent the professors to assess the situation. Harry had meant to try to find Dumbledore and explain, but the hall was a crush of students, and it was impossible. The crowd surged toward the exits. People from all four houses mixed together and were shoved toward the main doors. Dumbledore and the other professors slipped out through the side doors beside the high table. When they finally spilled out into the cooler air, the groups sorted themselves under the prefect's commands and began heading back to their houses. Harry and Hermione exchanged a look. They both knew Ron needed to be found. Harry was worried Ron didn't even know about the troll. Hermione knew Ron might be in the bathroom. They needed a plan. "Seamus, Neville, you two go find a professor," Harry called quickly. "Tell them we went to the lavatory to look for Ron." "Okay." Seamus and Neville didn't want to follow and cause more trouble. They hurried off. Harry and Hermione ran for the corridor leading to the toilets. Hermione had a tight, determined expression. "I'm coming with you," she said as they moved. "It was my fault Ron was upset in charms. Pointing out other people's mistakes like that, it wasn't right." Harry didn't think the danger would be immediate. Seamus and the others will have told the professors. They'll stop it. Hermione's face went grave. "By the time the professors get here, Ron could be—" Her voice dropped. "He might be in real danger." They turned a corner and Harry saw a flash of dark green cloak go up a side stair. The Slytherin colors meant only one professor could be wearing that cloak. Professor Snape. Harry wondered why Snape hadn't gone with the other professors. They hurried on. Harry's head spun with what Hermione had said. Trolls were huge, thick-skinned, and not easily affected by ordinary spells. Even experienced adult wizards would struggle against one. A few schoolchildren stood no chance. The idea from the film of levitating the troll's club to make it drop felt as impossible as trying to slide tackle a tiger. Harry and Hermione ran faster, hoping to reach the lavatories before anything horrible happened. To fit the Halloween mood, the castle had been decorated with enchanted darkness. The lights along the path and the candelabras were all extinguished. The entire first floor lay under a rolling shroud of shadow, laced with fake lightning and exaggerated thunder that sounded like a cheap stage show. A narrow passage opened off the corridor, and at the end of that passage was the girls' toilet. Light footsteps pounded down the hall, and Loren and the others sprinted into the passage, arriving out front of the toilet just as Ron's muffled sobs came from inside. Loren let out a small sigh of relief. They'd made it in time. The troll hadn't reached them yet. Hermione looked guilty. "Quick, tell Ron to come out. We have to get back as fast as we can." Harry pushed the wooden door open. The hinges squealed. He yanked Ron free. Ron's nose was raw and red. He wouldn't meet Loren or Hermione's eyes, ashamed for being the reason they'd come searching for him. The four of them exchanged a few curt nods and stepped back into the passage. "Roar!" The howl stopped them in their tracks. Ron felt as if something had gripped his throat. He couldn't breathe. From outside came heavy thuds. Thud, 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 the troll's footsteps. Just hearing them made the creature in the hallway seem enormous. Hermione clung to Loren's sleeve without meaning to. The troll is in the corridor. Harry's face went pale with fear. Back into the loo and hide. Wait for it to pass, Loren muttered, trying to sound calm. Even in panic, his resolve steadied the others. They ducked into the toilet, bolted the door, and huddled together, holding their breath, hardly daring to whisper. Thump, thump, thump. The troll's heavy steps grew closer. It had come down the passage. Ron broke out in a cold sweat. Hermione trembled against Loren. The troll was almost at the door. Hide in the stalls, Loren hissed. The four of them tiptoed into the innermost cubicle and peered through a crack at the door. Crash! The wooden panel flew apart like matchwood. A massive, calloused foot filled the doorway. A sickly stench accompanied it. For the first time, Loren and the others saw a troll up close. Its skin was dull and granite gray. It had a huge barrel-like body topped by a small, bald head and arms too long for its torso. Wizards looked like toys beside it. The sheer size of it pressed at their chests. Any touch would be fatal, they thought. The troll's eyes were veined with blood and utterly savage. It appeared to have a target in mind, lurching toward a row of stalls while brandishing a wooden club horizontally. Crouch, then run, Loren shouted, yanking open the stall door and dragging the others with him. The troll smashed a row of cubicles to splinters as they ran, wood scattered everywhere. The four of them pressed themselves against the far wall, 5 or 6 meters from the behemoth. The troll fixed its gaze on Harry and unleashed a bellowing roar. Wingardium Leviosa! Loren lunged for the club, but the levitation charm did nothing. The club stayed stuck in the troll's grip. Petrificus Totalis! Diffindo! Harry and Hermione fired off spells, light striking the troll's thick skin with no effect. The monster lumbered forward, and hopelessness crept in. Portaberto! Loren tried another heavy charm. Nothing. He thought back to Flamel's charms lessons and shifted tactics. Incendio! He cried, flinging everything he had into the spell. Crimson flames leapt across the floor. The fire licked the troll's legs and made it stagger back, blocking its advance. Heat rolled over them like a wave. Loren forced a tired smile. He had never felt this drained, not even after a long afternoon of class. But the flames died almost as quickly as they'd risen. Hogwarts' floors and corridors were warded. Charms could only do so much. No! Loren's relief crumpled into panic. He felt faint, his lips twitching. Nothing seemed to work. Flamel's lesson spun in his head, but none of the spells took hold. Wingardium Leviosa! Incendio! Hermione's clear voice rang out. Inspired by Loren, she hammered the levitation and fire charms in quick succession. Splinters and shards rose into the air and were set aflame, forming floating fireballs that circled the troll and barred its way. The little witch's hair whipped in the heated air, her robes fluttered, and the red glow of the flames painted her face, fierce and determined. The fire forced the troll back for real this time. Clumsy and uncoordinated, the monster retreated down the corridor, wrecked, and the four of them slipped out by another exit. Ron gaped at Hermione, admiration mixed with relief. Long live Granger, he blurted, voice shaking. Harry and Loren joined in, pairing the levitation charm with bursts of flame to keep the troll pinned back. Fireballs bobbed and weaved, dodging the club. Wooden splinters from the broken stalls burned until there was little kindling left. The troll swung wildly, scattering sparks as its club met the fireballs. But the wood was running out. Hermione's face went tight. No, at this rate we won't have enough wood. The floating fireballs were being consumed as they burned, and when the troll struck them. As the fuel dwindled, the protective ring thinned. Sweat beaded on all their faces, whether from heat or fear, they couldn't tell. Silence fell, except for the frantic whisper of Hermione's wand. At last, only a few charred planks remained, thinning the barrier between them and the troll. Its retreat slowed. It sensed its advantage. Roar! It swung its club in a frenzy to scatter the last fireballs and began to stride forward again. Ron trembled, barely able to keep his feet. If he hadn't gone to the loo when he did, he thought wildly, he would have wet himself. Snot dripped from his nose. He was useless, he told himself. The family embarrassment, the one who caused trouble. He couldn't do anything to help, yet he had to watch his friends die. Harry was the one who should be saved. How could Harry die because of him? Run, Ron screamed, voice raw. Tears and snot streaked down his face. He bolted toward the troll, trying to draw its attention so the others could get away. "Come on, you great lump." The stench of the troll, singed by the flames, turned into an acrid, burned smell, but Ron didn't notice. He reached the creature and began kicking and punching its leg like a madman, pounding its skin that felt like stone. The blows had no effect. The troll lifted its foot and booted Ron across the passage. He slammed into the wall and crumpled to the ground. He curled into himself, clutching his stomach. A dry, sharp breath escaped him. Pain froze him in place. Blood ran from his mouth in a vivid line. Even risking his life, he had done nothing to help. He was rubbish, utterly useless. Hermione started to cry softly, her voice muffled even through the noise of the dungeon. Harry's scar prickled, his pupils dilating a fraction. Sounds blurred and dulled, as if they were underwater. Hermione's sobs, the troll's heavy footsteps. Everything else slowed. He watched Ron curl up against the wall, and for a strange instant, thought of that raucous red-haired family he'd seen at the train station, so loud and ridiculous. He watched the troll raise its club, noticed the bulging muscles of its forearm, the gaps between its filthy nails, the black grime caked on the wood. Every detail burned into his mind. What a massive creature. Am I as big as its thumb? Probably. The troll lumbered forward. The scene reminded Harry of being chased by Dudley and his gang at the Muggle school, always running, always fleeing. He realized, with a clarity that surprised him, that he did not want to run this time. His muscles went loose, the panic ebbed. He bent his knees, leaned forward, and charged. No spell came to mind that would solve the moment, so he did what he'd always wanted to try when cornered. He ran straight at it. His head wasn't sure what would happen, but his body knew. Like a bowtruckle climbing a giant trunk, Harry scrambled up the gray-green slope of the troll's torso. He dodged, grasping hands, and the swooping club vaulted onto its waist and ended up on its head. The troll's bloodshot eyes flicked to him in panic. Harry pulled back his shoulder, flexed his arm, and clenched his fist. He swung for its nose. "Roar!" The troll bellowed. The punch did little physical damage, but something inside the beast snapped. It panicked, enraged that this tiny thing dared to strike it. One massive hand seized Harry's leg to pin him, the other rose to crush him. "Do something," Harry shouted, his voice muffled by the rush of blood to his head from being upside down. Shadows flickered in Loren's eyes. A blue light kindled in his pupils and spread across his irises. In that sudden clarity, the troll's hide glowed faintly brown, and where Harry had punched was a black, mottled patch on its nose. That was the weakness. Loren forced his breath steady. In his mind, the half-remembered, corrected incantation Portoberto had shown him snapped into focus. He poured every scrap of strength into his wand. He heard his own voice, thin and urgent. "Expulso, curse!" A blazing red beam shot from his wand and struck the black mark dead center. It punched straight through the troll's nose and out the back of its head with a thunderous explosion. A fist-sized hole was blown clean through the creature's skull. The troll staggered twice and then crumpled backward in a rigid fall. Harry slid off and hit the floor, gasping and hurting, but alive. Loren let a small, exhausted smile touch his lips. After he cast the charm, he could not move a finger. His head throbbed as if he'd gone 3 days without sleep. His eyes stung as though a bitter tonic had been poured into them. He could not stay upright and fell to the stone. He lay there, half-conscious, seeing a blur of Dumbledore and others appear. Hermione threw herself into Professor McGonagall's arms. Percy moved toward the curled-up Ron. Voices floated at the edge of his hearing. "Ron, run! Do something!" Hermione, "Loren, Loren!" They were close and distant at once. Loren felt pleasantly weightless and wanted nothing more than sleep. When he opened his eyes, the light stabbed at him. The hospital wing was neat and bright, 3 beds with white sheets, shining cabinets. Loren was in the middle bed, Ron in the innermost one, and Harry near the door, counting the window panes with a peculiar cheer. 788, 789, and 81. Harry muttered. Loren sat up. "Did you notice you miscounted?" he croaked. Harry grinned like a boy relieved not to be alone. "Thank goodness, I'm finally not the only one awake." Loren reached for the water jug and poured. His throat felt full of gravel. Harry, full of a child's restlessness, told him everything he knew. He had woken early the next morning. Loren had slept a day and a night. Ron had broken a few ribs and suffered internal injuries, but Madame Pomfrey promised He would be fine after a week's rest. But Ron hasn't woken yet, Harry said, his voice dropping. With nothing else to do, Harry kept himself occupied in bed, though he was healed. Madame Pomfrey would not let him up. He kept murmuring, as if rehearsed, "Hermione will come after class. Madame Pomfrey said talking to you will help you wake up sooner. Hermione called your name thousands of times. Professor Dumbledore will come tonight. He wants to ask you about what happened. Your charms were brilliant. It actually blasted through the troll's head." At that, Harry looked puzzled. "Why didn't you use it earlier?" Loren read no blame in the question, only curiosity, and said, "Because of you, my charms could work." "Me?" Harry blinked, remembering. "I was in a weird state then. I just rushed forward without thinking." "How odd. Why would you rush forward?" Loren asked. Harry only then noticed the strangeness and added, "And Ron, he seemed a bit odd at the time, too." Before they could puzzle it out, Madame Pomfrey pushed the door open and barked, "Lie down! No talking." Harry closed his mouth and lay back immediately. She handed Loren a peppermint-flavored restorative. He drank it and felt a cool clarity spread through his head, a comfortable warmth through his limbs. "You nearly drained all your magic," she scolded, though her eyes were worried and not unkind. "This is very dangerous for a young wizard. If this had been anywhere but Hogwarts, you could have lost control of your magic entirely or never been able to use it again. Rest, no noise," she finished, and left. As the door clicked shut, Harry sat up again. "I think we've already—" "Quiet," came Madame Pomfrey's voice from the corridor, making Harry slouch and Loren smile inwardly. Harry resumed counting the panes in a small, placid mumble. 1, 2, 3. That evening, Hermione arrived with Dumbledore. Hermione had changed into a clean Gryffindor robe, long white socks, and tidy leather shoes. She looked every inch the small, eager witch who could, when needed, stand like an iron shield. She bounded in, and seeing Loren sitting up, grinned, flashing 2 neat front teeth. "Loren," she chirped, then dug in her bag for a notebook. "I've taken notes for our classes. You can use mine to catch up, and if anything's unclear, ask me." "Thank you," Loren said, a little at a loss, and took the notebook. Dumbledore stayed a step behind Hermione, smiling with his usual soft patience. "You always seem to see things others do not," he said when Loren glanced his way. "I'd very much like to hear your perspective." That from a sleeve of his vast robes, he produced a bag of sweets. One should never refuse candy from a friend who comes to visit a patient. "Yay!" Harry cheered. Loren began to explain what he'd seen that night, how, as Harry was about to be struck, something in him, his innate sight, flared. The troll's body was wrapped in a brownish veil, and only the black mark Harry had left on its nose stood out. He had followed that mark and cast the charm. "I also saw red light on both Harry and Ron," he added, describing the last clear image before he had lost consciousness. 50. Magic Riot. The Black Mark. Dumbledore looked at Harry's scar as if the phrase were a key. His gaze darkened. Lord Voldemort's influence on Harry was deeper than he had imagined. The bond between them seemed closer still. He suspected the black mark that had broken through the troll's skin was Harry's scar leaking power, Harry unknowingly using what Voldemort had left behind. Dumbledore kept his thoughts contained. Perhaps the plan that had involved Quirrell needed changing. "A splendid encounter," he said instead, turning to Hermione, Ron, and Harry. "Wisdom, sacrifice, courage, even from your account, I can see the bright gleam of those qualities." Harry and Hermione flushed. Loren clicked his tongue, unconcerned. "Is there a reward?" he asked. Dumbledore ignored the jibe and regarded Loren thoughtfully. "I have a vague idea about the strange light you saw." They leaned forward. "A wizard's magic, soul, and emotions are closely linked," Dumbledore went on. "When you first discover unusual power, your emotions are often unusual too." Harry remembered moments of wild, frightening magic, being chased by Dudley and suddenly flying onto a chimney, the scene at the zoo, the glass vanishing, and the python getting loose. Hermione thought of her childhood, reading a fairy tale so exciting that both she and the book floated. Loren thought of his eyes. He'd felt his magic stir there. Dumbledore waited for them to come back from their memories and continued. "Young wizards' souls are not yet steady. When emotions run high, magic is more likely to riot," he explained. "Younger students, those below 3rd year, are at the lowest end of the scale. Their magic cannot manage more advanced charms." As they grow older, they can learn more complex spells that demand more power and control. Spells like the Patronus Charm and Apparition depend not only on understanding, but also on the quality of one's magic. The differences between ordinary wizards and aurors, between aurors and professors, between a dueling champion like Flitwick and a professor like Quirrell, are not merely quantitative. Magic can change in quality, and the same spell cast by different people can produce completely different effects. Many factors influence growth. Few can explain them. Loren, who could cast Portoberto all day when he was playing, had been exhausted by a single flame in the troll fight. "Headmaster Dumbledore," Loren asked aloud, "why do emotions promote the growth of magic?" Dumbledore stroked his beard. "I don't know, Loren." The admission surprised them. There was something the famous Dumbledore did not know. In fact, most magical mysteries remain unexplained. He went on, "Emotions can also work the other way. Long-term suppression can produce an obscurial." An obscurial, Hermione gasped, hands flying to her mouth. She knew of them, unlucky children who despised their magic and suppressed their emotions until their magic warped and became harmful. Dumbledore's expression grew distant for a moment. "Apologies," he said when Loren called his name. "With age, my mind wanders." "When magic riots, a wizard will follow instinct," Dumbledore resumed. "They may cast spells, act on impulse, or do nothing. No one can predict it with certainty." Harry thought back to his own actions and suddenly understood why he had charged the troll. "So it was a magical riot. No wonder I was so impulsive," he said with a nervous laugh. Dumbledore repeated, "A magical riot follows your instinct." Harry hesitated. "What do you mean by that?" Loren grinned. "It means you're naturally impulsive." No one laughed, but Harry felt Dumbledore's smile like sunlight. Hermione tried to look composed, though her shoulders trembled. "Courage is a precious thing," Dumbledore said softly. "As I perceive it," he added, "all four of you still show residual magical disturbances." Loren was surprised. He had thought it was only Harry and Ron. Dumbledore explained, "Life and death carry powerful magic. When you stand on the edge of life and death, your magic, body, and soul are all in an extraordinary state. A magical riot is just a matter of scale." Hermione breathed a little easier. "I feel more relaxed about charms in class now," she said. "For at least a week or two," Dumbledore warned, "do not cast spells at full power. Your magic will continue to settle." He looked at Ron. "Even now your friend, who risked himself for the rest of you, still has a strong surge of magic." They turned to Ron. He sat wrapped in bandages and with a slightly reddened nose, his face calm. Harry could see the guilt in him. "He feels terrible. He thinks he put us all in danger," Harry said. Hermione looked chastened. "It's my fault. I was too proud. Ron's wand just wasn't right." She'd thought Ron dead when he'd collapsed, coughing blood. Loren and Harry were silent. Buying Ron a wand would be easy enough, but Ron would hate the idea of charity. Loren's original plan, the chestnut wand he'd intended to buy from Pettigrew, had been confiscated by the Ministry, and he had no other means now. "Madame Pomfrey says his injuries aren't serious," Harry added quietly. "Cherishing friendship and having the courage to sacrifice, that is Gryffindor through and through," Dumbledore approved. Loren conceded that Ron, despite his greed, dislike of study, and constant complaining, had stepped up when it mattered. Dumbledore smiled. "The troll may not have any rare magical materials, but it can still be sold. I can exchange it for galleons as a reward, about 50 galleons. A wand costs 7 galleons, Hermione calculated quickly. Even if Ron gets a share, there's enough for a wand. Harry hesitated. "Is that all right? Selling the troll and handing over the money to students?" "You cleared the troll and kept the castle safe. You deserve it," Dumbledore said. Then his tone turned stern. "You did, however, break school rules by leaving the group and acting on your own." Hermione stared at him as if awaiting a final exam verdict. "Merits and demerits cancel each other out," Dumbledore said. "No points will be deducted." Hermione exhaled with relief. "However," Dumbledore added, "all of you will have detention with Professor Snape." The faces fell. Loren had spent enough time with Snape to be unbothered. Harry, meanwhile, felt his temper flare. "Can't we have someone else? Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, Professor Binns even." He imagined Snape picking on him relentlessly, forcing him to drink vile concoctions while making Loren mix antidotes. Dumbledore's decision stood. He chatted with them a little longer, reminded them to rest and to follow Madame Pomfrey's instructions, then led Hermione back to the infirmary. "You rest well," he said. "Seamus and the others will come to see you tomorrow." Hermione waved, and the door closed. Dinner was brought to them by Madame Pomfrey: bread, apples, and boiled eggs, no meat. Loren and Harry picked at it listlessly, both only wishing to be discharged so they could eat steak and chicken legs. Ron was still out cold. Madame Pomfrey had given him a potion from a bottle and was watching him closely. As she turned to leave, she noticed the snacks the boys had on the bedside table. Her face went stern and she slipped them inside her robes. "You can have them back when you're discharged." "When can we leave?" Loren and Harry said at the same time. That night, the moonlight poured through the window and laid a pale sheet across the ward floor. Loren lay awake on his bed, replaying the day. He had been careless, thinking a small tweak to the plot would let them avoid the troll, and he had paid for it. If he'd prepared properly, brought charms or a potion to ward off trolls, things wouldn't have gone so badly. He should have understood earlier how plot correction worked. It had started back in flying class. He stopped Neville in time, and without the Remembrall as a trigger, Harry still had his run-in with Malfoy and ended up on the Quidditch team. In the troll incident, Hermione had been replaced by Ron in the bathroom, but the main characters still ran into the troll. If he hadn't interfered, how would Harry and the others have handled it? Events could be nudged, but the outcomes always seemed to snap back to the story's track. Viewed differently, that wasn't entirely bad. Loren, a small butterfly, wouldn't set off a storm that would sweep him away. His foresight could keep him alive through the war. Pettigrew was in Azkaban now, and the Ministry knew he was an animagus. He shouldn't be able to escape, so how would Voldemort return? Loren had no answer, but he didn't linger on it. Apart from Horcruxes giving Dumbledore trouble, Voldemort otherwise seemed checked. A mad, terrifying leader could not wriggle free of Dumbledore's reach. As long as Loren stayed on the side of justice, surviving until the end didn't seem impossible. He dozed off and woke to Harry whispering, "Loren, you awake?" "Yes," Loren said flatly. He had no patience for bedside drama. Harry, unable to sleep, wanted to talk. "Did you ever think we were going to die back then?" Loren thought of the bathroom and felt a pang of regret for getting involved. In the book, the three of them had dealt with the troll cleanly. Perhaps Ron's levitation charm could have taken away the club. Because of Loren's interference, they had almost been killed. He resolved to avoid adventurous plots in future. He didn't have a protagonist's halo to rely on. "When I saw Ron get kicked away, I remembered seeing his family on the train," Harry murmured. "If Ron had died, his whole family would have been crushed. You and Hermione have relatives, but I only have a godfather I just met." "I thought sacrificing myself for the three of you would be a good deal," Harry added softly. "Rushing in headlong wouldn't have saved anyone," Loren told him. "It would just have made you die sooner than the rest of us, you idiot." Harry scratched his head. "I suppose you're right. I need to learn stronger charms so I don't have to barrel in and hope," Loren said. He paused, then added wryly, "Or you could take after Godric Gryffindor, rush in and kill things directly." Harry smiled at the idea. The story had always shown Godric Gryffindor as the founder who favored close combat, wand in one hand, sword in the other, carving a path through enemies. "Sounds cool," Harry said, though he admitted his frame might not be up to it. "I guess I could work out and eat more." They passed the time with rambling conversation. The hospital wing was too dull to sustain anything else. Loren didn't remember exactly when he'd fallen asleep. The next morning, he woke to Harry and Ron talking. "I punched its disgusting nose really hard," Harry was bragging, his voice kept low but buoyant, like a man recounting a feat to anyone who'd listen. When they saw Loren stir, they both perked up. Ron still had a cough, but he was sitting up, speaking in fits. He looked a little less pale and a lot more pleased with himself. Harry mentioned that all four of them had felt a surge of magic when the troll incident happened, but Ron's had been the strongest. Ron's smile, which had been restrained, slowly spread across his face until he couldn't stop grinning. They talked about Dumbledore dividing the reward from the troll's corpse, about 50 galleons total. "Merlin's beard," Ron laughed. At least 12 galleons each. Loren and Harry exchanged a look. 12 galleons could buy Ron a new wand, and with a better wand, he'd stand a much better chance at keeping up in class. Then I can buy everyone's autograph from Charlie's team, Ron announced, eyes sparkling. Harry barked a laugh. What's in your head? But first, a wand, Ron said, greedily picturing his purchases. Harry threw back his covers to get out of bed. He seemed determined to give Ron a light shove. Just then, Madame Pomfrey came in with breakfast and to check on Ron. His lungs still had a small scar, and she wanted to observe him for a few more days, she said. Ron spooned porridge into his mouth and between mouthfuls allowed himself a bold thought. My magic surged, and theirs didn't. Does that mean I'm stronger now? His excitement was immediate. Can I beat George and Fred now? Harry blinked. Why would that be your first thought after getting stronger? Beat your brothers. The prerequisite is that you actually master third-year charms, Loren advised. Ron nodded earnestly. Raw power still needed technique. The day passed in small talk. In the afternoon, Hermione, Neville, and Seamus came by. Then Percy, George, and Fred dropped in. Percy had been terrified the night of the troll when he had seen Ron curled on the floor with blood coming from his mouth. The sight had left him shaken. Even Percy, usually so proper, agreed with George and Fred that Mrs. Weasley didn't need to be told about Ron's injuries just yet. Seeing Ron alive and complaining about wands, Percy visibly relaxed. Neville and Seamus still looked pale. They'd thought they were only informing a professor, not almost losing 3 roommates. 52. Liveliness in the lounge. George and Fred headed straight for Ronnie's bedside, their voices as loud and cheerful as ever. Look who it is. The one who defeated the troll, the pride of the Weasleys. Mum'll send you a howler to praise you. They rattled off the lines, rubbing Ronnie's freckled face as they spoke. He brightened at first, then paled when he heard the word Mum. Oh no, I'm doomed. Mum's definitely going to hang me up and give me a good scolding when I get home. Even though he was being handled so much he could barely speak, Ronnie pictured the scene perfectly. Percy, unusually moved, cut in. We haven't written the letter yet. You can tell Mum yourself. George and Fred each took one of Ronnie's hands and switched from rubbing to pinching his cheeks, saying in unison, This'll teach you a lesson. Ow, ow, ow! Ronnie struggled, but couldn't break free. You two are dead. My magic's getting stronger. When I'm in 3rd year, I'll hang you up and kick your backsides proper. Ha! The twins laughed. But when you're in 3rd year, we'll already be in 5th year. When you're in 5th year, we'll have graduated. Poor Ronnie, my lad. He'll never catch up. That cruel logic shattered whatever defiant pride Ronnie had left. His eyes went dull. He had no strength to resist as the twins hauled him along, muffled cries escaping him. The 3 mischievous boys had made the hospital wing much livelier than Madame Pomfrey would have liked. Neville stood off to the side, guilty. If he'd pulled Loren and Harry to find a professor right away, none of this might have happened. If only one person had been in the bathroom, it might never have attracted the troll. Neville, it was an accident, Loren said gently, seeing Neville beating himself up. Nobody could have predicted it. Hermione added, Not even Dumbledore. Seamus, who'd stopped shaking from fright, stared after the triumphant stories with a different kind of regret. If I'd known it'd be this exciting, I'd have gone with you, he muttered, full of rue. What a story to tell. Everyone outside was already calling the 4 Gryffindor heroes the ones who defeated the troll. Seamus wished he'd been part of it and started whispering to himself in a half-dream. My roommate is the savior, the troll-slaying hero, from an Auror family. Nobody paid him much attention. Madame Pomfrey didn't let the visitors linger. She shooed them out before long. Loren and the other 2 remained in the ward for 3 days and were only allowed to leave on Sunday night. As they stepped onto the cool stone of the corridor, Ronnie complained, If it weren't for classes on Monday, I think Madame Pomfrey would have kept us another few days. Not us, you, Loren said, taking a deep, grateful breath of fresh air after being cooped up for 2 days. Harry nodded. Loren and I woke up on the 2nd day. We weren't really injured. You were the worst off. Ronnie couldn't admit the truth. Come off it. We're brothers in life and death now. Can't we at least be hospitalized together? All right, all right. Harry laughed and bent toward the portrait hole to say the password. Dragon slag. The fat lady flung her hand up and, in an overdramatic operatic trill, sang, "The Gryffindor heroes are back!" They paused at the portrait for a moment as the fat lady recovered from her aria. When the portrait opened and they stepped inside, the common room was pitch black for a beat. Then the fireplace flared to life and a roar went up. "Welcome our heroes!" the crowd cheered. Confetti burst down around Loren and the others. The common room was packed. George and Fred stood at the front, the chatter revealing nearly every familiar face. The Quidditch team, Wood, Angelina, even Percy, usually so formal, was there. Almost everyone in Gryffindor had turned up. Hermione, who'd been lingering in a corner, was nudged forward by her roommate Parvati Patil until she was pushed right beside Loren to receive the cheers. She was used to being noticed when professors asked questions, but this was on a different scale. Her face flushed prettily. She was as pleased as she was embarrassed. "Tonight's a party for our Gryffindor heroes who defeated the troll," Lee Jordan announced perfectly, and the room surged. Seamus and Dean dragged Neville around Harry and Ronnie, loudly embellishing the story for dramatic effect. And then Harry landed the flying kick that sent the troll sprawling. Harry wanted the earth to swallow him up. Why were they making him the center of this? Ronnie, meanwhile, was busy adding his own flourishes. Loren and Hermione, uncomfortable with the attention, slipped back toward the hearth to fetch something to eat. Loren had been starved for days and attacked the food with obvious relish, gobbling pieces of meat down with big, appreciative bites. Hermione sat near him, placing a cup beside his hand, one elbow propped, watching him with bright eyes. Loren paused, swallowed a mouthful, and looked up. "Why are you staring at me?" Hermione's voice was soft. "At the time, I really thought we were all going to die." He blinked, then said firmly, "It's over now." "I've been thinking about it," she went on. "Thinking about what?" "Magic isn't a gentle, safe thing," Hermione said, then steadied herself. "From potion class to flying class to the whole troll thing. People paid a price." Loren hesitated. So we need to be able to protect ourselves." Her voice hardened with resolve. "Defense against the dark arts just isn't enough. We can't only rely on teachers. We have to learn to do it ourselves." Loren hadn't expected this side of Hermione, the certainty that comes from facing danger, but he liked it. She'd always been strong in theory. Now she wanted to focus on practical defense. It would only make them better. "What are you planning to do?" he asked. "Practice with you, like when we practiced the shield charm before." A smile broke across Hermione's face. "What do you say, Mr. 2220? Loren sputtered. "What are you talking about? We agreed not to mention that title anymore." "It's not 22-0, she teased. "I won the last match. Anyway, that was the old you. Now." She let the rest hang in the air, amused. Loren muttered under his breath about how things were different now, about yesterday's glory and looking to the future. Hermione would occasionally pop in another teasing, satisfied 22-0, and he'd flinch and go on again. Having the tables turned and watching himself be teased by her was a new, peculiar kind of fun for him. This party wasn't just to celebrate Loren and his three friends. More importantly, the young lions wanted to make up for Halloween, which had been cut short. Laughter went on late into the night until Professor McGonagall's voice sounded from outside the portrait hole. "Celebration is permitted, but in moderation." Her voice had been amplified by the sonorous charm and carried through the common room. Percy sat bolt upright and called back, "Understood, Professor McGonagall." "That's enough for tonight. We have classes tomorrow." Percy stayed long enough to herd the last of the younger students toward their dormitories, and everyone filed upstairs giggling, still basking in the evening's excitement. Fred and George high-fived Loren as they passed him. "You should thank us," one of them said. "We got the food from the kitchens," the other added, both perfectly in sync as always. "You two should turn in early," Percy advised, and then he went up to bed. Only Loren, Hermione, Harry, and Ron remained by the fire. They sat in silence for a moment, the logs crackling and the flames throwing a warm glow over their faces. It was the first time the four of them had been alone together since Halloween. "Everyone, what an adventure we've had." Loren broke the quiet with a grin. "Tell me, who's the Troll Slayer warrior?" Hermione and Harry couldn't help laughing at Loren's dramatic pose. Ron, though, didn't join in. He'd been carrying guilt since the whole affair. Now that they were alone, he finally let it out. "I'm sorry, all of you. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have been in danger." Loren shrugged. Dumbledore couldn't have foreseen it either. He didn't think blame belonged to anyone. None of them had escaped trouble, even knowing the plot. Hermione nodded. She could see how she might also have contributed. Harry put a hand on Ron's shoulder. "We're blood brothers now." They smiled and shared a quiet moment. After Hermione said goodnight and went up to her dorm, the three boys went back to the boys' wing and got into bed. A few days later, Loren returned to the magical book. Before opening it, he frowned and glanced around, feeling like something was missing. He sat up. "Today's Sunday, right?" Harry blinked, then shrugged. "Yeah, I think so." "Tomorrow's Monday, Transfiguration with Professor McGonagall, right?" Loren asked. Ron's face fell. "Yeah." Loren's expression cleared. "Then did you finish your Transfiguration homework?" Harry and Ron went pale. They had been in the hospital wing for the past few days and had completely forgotten about homework. Both of them let out the same desperate, muffled cry. "Help!" "Sack!" Loren clicked his tongue. "That's more like it. Otherwise, it always feels like something's missing." He handed them his own homework, then burrowed back under the covers and tapped the dueling club icon on the book. The picture flickered, and Nicholas Flamel's silver-white eyes gleamed. Loren told him about Halloween. Flamel listened, brow furrowed. "A magical riot and a black mark on the troll's nose," he mused. "I have no records of this, but I'm very interested in the charm you used at that crucial moment." "Show me," he said. Loren drew his wand, looking around for a target and finding only Flamel's floating form. "At you?" "Of course." Flamel tilted his head, spread his arms as if to receive it, and a soft white light emanated from him. "Incendio Portaberto." Loren didn't hesitate. He didn't expect to harm the portrait. His wand tip flared red, and the charm struck Flamel's chest. There was no explosion, only a wash of red, blue, green, and yellow light across the portrait. After a long moment, Flamel opened his eyes. It evolved from Portaberto, removing the opening characteristic and focusing on explosive penetration. He was thoughtful. "I have no related records in my memory, but the way you combine charms at the right second is interesting. The creation of charms requires mastering magical principles, predefining an effect, designing precise wand movements, and magical operations. The incantation is only a representation. History has no shortage of talented people who devised charms this way, but few of those creations were passed down." He looked at Loren with a mixture of caution and encouragement. "Don't be arrogant. True charms are tested and refined by generations of wizards and by time itself." Loren wasn't too disappointed. He'd known it was a lucky flash piece more than a fully formed charm. "So is it any good?" Flamel paused, then answered bluntly, "A poor charm. If you wish to pursue explosive force, the classic Bombarda is more suitable and far more powerful. If you want penetration, you pursue sharpness, not explosion." Loren snorted softly. He doesn't know what real fun is, he thought, but he didn't argue. In his mind, one day this little trick would be remembered by young wizards as a childhood favorite. Monday morning, Transfiguration. Harry and Ron tried to keep their eyes open. Their lids were heavy and their eyes bloodshot. Hermione shook her head at them. "How long did you boys play after you got back?" Loren smirked. "Not us. Those two only remembered their Transfiguration homework right before bed. Who knows how long they wrote?" McGonagall noticed the listless, red-eyed pair from the front of the class and scolded them sharply. "You are still new students. You mustn't pick up bad habits. When something happens, inform a professor immediately. Do not act presumptuously and recklessly. You may have extracurricular lives, but they must not interfere with your classes." As she spoke, she tapped her wand and transformed one student's desk into a squealing, protesting fat pig. The class sat up straight and silent. "Perhaps some of you should be turned into parchment and ordered to copy the school rules 100 times, she added dryly. Ron sat bolt upright for the rest of the lesson, too frightened to doze. When class was over, the four of them walked together down the corridor. Students from other houses whispered and occasionally greeted the four young troll slayers. Ron swore on the name of the troll slayer warrior that the first thing he would do after waking from any future nap was to finish his Transfiguration homework. He vowed never again to stay up the night before to finish an assignment. Harry nodded in agreement. At dinner, Ron sealed a letter to his mother and sent it off with an owl. Harry peered at him. "What did you tell Aunt Molly?" "A troll snuck into the school, and brave Ron Weasley, with the help of his friends, dealt with it," Ron said calmly, tucking into a chicken leg. Loren nodded approvingly. "Good writing," he said. Harry grinned. "You could have kept a little of the truth back. Now you probably can't keep any." "Hey, Harry," Ron snapped, half laughing. "What else was I supposed to say? I almost became troll fodder, lay in the infirmary for 3 days, and have to see Madame Pomfrey again next week?" "If you'd written that, you'd be getting a very particular sort of visit from my mother in the Great Hall tomorrow," Harry replied. The next morning, just as Loren was beginning his porridge, a commotion erupted overhead. Hundreds of owls streamed into the Great Hall, circling and dropping letters and parcels among the talking students. A gray owl landed at Ron's place, the same messenger from yesterday. It plopped a red envelope onto the table, flapped its wings frantically, and flew off. "Oh no," Ron muttered, staring at the envelope and leaning as far back as he could, refusing to touch it. "A howler!" Neville practically jumped out of his seat when he saw it. He looked pale and tense. He set his bread down and edged away. Loren, Hermione, Harry, and everyone nearby watched with curiosity as the envelope quivered on the table, flushing a deeper red and beginning to swell like a balloon. Neville, too anxious to stammer, hissed, "Open it quickly. You don't want to find out what happens if you ignore it." Ron stretched his neck away from the thing and, with a shaking hand, ripped the red paper open. "Ron Weasley! How dare you? How dare you be so careless with me?" His mother's voice thundered out across the long Gryffindor table, the howler shrieking like a loudspeaker right beside their ears. Ron practically disappeared into his chair, only a bright red forehead visible above the table. People nearby drew back, making a wide, silent ring around him. The plates and spoons clattered as the walls of the hall echoed the howler's furious tones. "You are a great, big idiot. You're even wilder than your two brothers. I can't believe you went and got mixed up with a troll. Did you ever think about how your father and I felt when we found out? Come home this weekend. I'll deal with you then." The howler finished, Loren's ears still ringing, as the red envelope burst into flames and shriveled into ash that drifted away. For a moment, the whole hall suffered from a deaf, ringing silence. People shouted at one another because they couldn't hear. Seamus flopped back down, grinning and yelling, "Was that a howler? Brilliant." Dean saw Seamus open his mouth and, hearing nothing, bellowed, "What'd you say? Why aren't you making any noise? Why are you opening your mouth and not saying anything?" "I can't hear a thing," echoed around the tables, while George and Fred experimented with ridiculous noises, making everyone laugh. Slowly, the chatter rebuilt itself, and Loren returned to his porridge. Harry wasn't especially worried for Ron. After all, they dealt with a troll. Ron's mum couldn't be scarier than that. "You'll be able to buy your own wand this weekend anyway," he said. Ron, still pale and subdued, tried to smile. "That's consoling," he said, voice flat. Seamus leaned over, still loud from the ringing. "Ron, if you ever get another howler, you have to call me." Friday arrived. There was only potions class that morning, and then the first years had the weekend off. Later, in the Gryffindor common room, Loren and Hermione sat by a window. Hermione was absorbed in a book. Loren was bent over a parchment, revising an essay on the medicinal properties and uses of wolfsbane. "The sun must have risen in the west," Ron said, sprawled in a chair with a milk candy in his mouth. "That old bat actually didn't take points from Gryffindor? She must have been distracted." He was talking to himself and then let his imagination run. Maybe today's Snape was someone else in disguise. Polyjuice potion, maybe. The real Snape must have been hurt. "That's ridiculous," Hermione said without looking up. "You won't be tormented by the old bat again." Ron crowed, getting more excited. Harry frowned, remembering the figure in a green cloak he'd seen going up the stairs on Halloween night. "Maybe there's another reason," he said, turning a chess piece between his fingers. "On Halloween, I thought I saw Professor Snape going upstairs in the corridor." Hermione looked up. "At that time, Dumbledore had taken the professors to catch the troll. Didn't they all go down to the dungeons together?" Ron sat up, pretending to be deep in thought, then grinned and declared, "There must be a secret conspiracy." Harry's mind went to the room on the left side of the fourth-floor corridor, where Hagrid's mysterious object from Gringotts was kept, guarded by Fluffy. He had a vague, nagging suspicion. "What do you think, Loren?" Loren knew Snape likely went upstairs sometimes to check on the stone, to guard against Quirrell, and, more to the point, he had been going to Snape's office every Friday. But he didn't want to say anything that might drag him into trouble after the troll incident. He was only a first year and wanted to keep his head down. "Why don't you ask Snape yourself tonight?" he suggested, without looking up from his essay. "Did you forget Dumbledore gave us detention with Snape?" Ron groaned. "Merlin, the thought of it will keep me in a state of panic all afternoon." He chewed the candy slowly. It had lost its taste. Harry put on a melodramatic face. "I feel like I won't live long. If Snape poisons me and you have to brew the antidote, tell Professor McGonagall immediately." "I'll always miss you, Harry," Ron replied, treating the whole thing like a joke. Hermione rolled her eyes. "This is a school," she said. "Even for Dumbledore's sake, Snape wouldn't poison you." Loren closed his parchment and tried to change the subject. "What are your plans for the afternoon?" "I'm going to Madame Pomfrey for a checkup," Ron said. He'd been told to return for a follow-up. Harry hesitated, then smiled. "I plan to go see Hagrid. He's been worried about me since I got hurt." Hermione shrugged. "I'll be catching up on homework," she said. She wasn't too bothered about the detention. No points had been docked, and they weren't being expelled. Hardly the worst punishment. 55. Parseltongue. In the evening, the group followed Loren down to Professor Snape's office. The basement corridors were dim and a little eerie at night. Ron grew more uneasy the closer they got. "Madame Pomfrey must not have checked my injury properly. I should go back and have it looked at again," he fretted. "When you saw Madame Pomfrey this afternoon, you should have gotten me an antidote too," Harry muttered, "so we wouldn't have to come all this way again." Hermione ignored their bickering and hurried to catch up with Loren, hoping to pick up something useful from him. "What did Professor Snape usually make you do?" she asked. "Help process medicinal ingredients and learn how to brew potions," Loren said calmly. It was true enough, only the ingredients he'd handled before had been a little different. The office door was open. Loren knocked, then led the others inside. Snape was not hunched over a stack of papers as usual. He stood in front of his desk, watching them file in. His gaze lingered on Harry longer than on the others, sweeping over each face and then returning to the scar on Harry's forehead. No one noticed the somber look on his face, the scar that was Lily's mark. For a moment, it was the look that might have disappointed Lily. "Champions who defeated the troll," Snape said with a sneer. "If it were another time, I should like to demonstrate how ridiculous and self-important you are." All four of them bowed their heads. Snape's contempt shifted to Loren and Hermione. "I thought you two were smarter, but you're as reckless and ignorant as any Gryffindor. What is the difference between your brains and a troll's?" Silence fell on the office. Snape turned away without another word and led them into the storage room where 4 covered boxes stood waiting. Loren felt his stomach drop. He muttered under his breath, "Flowers, not snakes. It's flowers, not snakes." "I don't have time for detention games with you 4 champions," Snape said. "The galleons Dumbledore promised are on the table. Loren will tell you what to do. If I return and the ingredients aren't properly processed, you'll have detention every Friday for the next month." With that, he left, closing the door with a sharp slam. Inside the storage room, the 4 exchanged glances. Harry exhaled. "I thought I was going to be poisoned and hauled off to the hospital wing," he said, relief evident in his voice. "I didn't expect to be doing ingredient processing." Ron relaxed too. "Just getting shouted at by Professor Snape. Much better than I thought." Hermione looked to Loren. "What now?" "Don't get too cheerful," Loren warned, and stepped up to the boxes. "Time to open the treasure chests." He lifted a lid, and a chorus of hisses answered. Green-patterned vipers coiled and twisted inside the box. Ron and Hermione screamed. Hermione even took a stumbling step back. Harry stared at the boxes, stunned, his face oddly blank. "Bingo," Loren said. "Hit the jackpot." He moved to a cupboard shelf, took a row of test tubes, and called, "Watch." Loren reached into the box, not hesitating, caught a snake, pried its mouth open, and rested its fangs against the mouth of a test tube. He waited calmly for venom to drip in. "These snakes are enchanted," he explained. "They won't bite. If they go past the golden line, their bodies will stiffen. There's no danger." He didn't explain the snake's venomous potency, no need to make Hermione more frightened. Then he stepped back and gestured for the others to start. Harry still sat stunned. Ron's legs trembled and he wouldn't move. Hermione was shaking and on the verge of tears. "Do you want 1 night of detention or a month?" Loren asked, and when no one moved, he began collecting venom on his own. He could remember his own fear the first time, so he started alone and waited for them to muster courage. After watching Loren for a while, Hermione squared her shoulders, wiped her eyes, and stepped forward. "I'll try," she whispered. Her voice was small and trembling. She reached out and took a snake gently. Her shoulders shook, but she set her jaw, lifted the snake, held her arms straight and head tucked, pressed the snake's fangs to the test tube. When she flung the snake into another empty box afterward, she panted and sobbed quietly, but had no tears left. Loren put a hand on her shoulder to steady her. Seeing Hermione do it, Ron wouldn't be left behind. He pulled Harry toward another box and started to work. Harry moved slowly, then, almost without noticing, began making a soft hissing sound, an imitation at first. "Hiss, hiss, hiss!" Ron, fighting his own shaking hands, tried to focus on the task. "Hiss!" The noises grew more like actual speech than imitation. Ron snapped. "Please, Harry, stop making weird noises, okay?" Harry startled and looked up. Loren and Hermione turned as well. Harry looked at Ron blankly. "Didn't you hear them talking?" Loren slapped his forehead. Harry had always had a way with serpents. Ron's mouth fell open. You can talk to snakes. You're a parcel mouth." "A what?" Harry asked. "A parselmouth," Ron said, excited and a little breathless. "You can talk to snakes." "What's wrong with that?" Harry frowned. "I've done it before. I talked to a boa constrictor back when we were at the zoo." "It's not ordinary," Ron said, lowering his voice, though there was no one else around. "Parcel tongue. It's Salazar Slytherin's old ability. That's why Slytherin's symbol is a snake. People think Parselmouths are descended from Slytherin, and lots of them are dark wizards. It has a terrible reputation." Panic stabbed at Harry. "I'm not a dark wizard. I'm not." Loren hadn't expected Harry to reveal this here. He looked at Ron and Hermione, then at Harry. "We all know Harry isn't a bad person," he said. "As friends, we should keep this to ourselves." They met his gaze and nodded. Loren turned to Harry, more serious than usual. "Don't ever show people you can speak parcel tongue. Not here, not anywhere. Promise me." Harry nodded. It felt sensible. Their concern eased his panic. Parcel tongue wasn't illegal, he told himself, but it made people fear and judge. He would be careful. They resumed work. Almost immediately, there was a ripple of hissing from the box. Loren's eyes brightened. "Ask them if they can spit the venom into the test tubes themselves." Hermione and Ron looked at Harry with new anticipation. Harry bent close to the box and made a string of soft hissing sounds. The snakes answered in hisses and clicks, like a conversation. Even knowing what it meant, listening to it gave the 3 human listeners goosebumps. After a moment, Harry straightened up with a grin. "They say yes. It'll be easier for everyone. We just need to put the tubes in." "Brilliant," Ron cheered. The idea of having to reach in and collect venom from those writhing things one by one had made him shiver. Loren fixed the test tubes into a rack and set the whole thing into the box. The snakes coiled politely around the tubes and spat their venom into the glass with remarkable precision. Harry hovered nearby, occasionally hissing a quiet exchange. Ron watched, torn between fascination and fear. With the work easier, Hermione finally relaxed enough to take in the rest of the storage room. She pointed out the labeled jars and boxes as she walked, naming the items one by one. "Bicorn horn," she read. "African tree snake skin." "Professor Snape must be very wealthy," she said. "These ingredients are worth a fortune." Ron looked around eagerly. "How can you tell?" Hermione, a little pleased, explained. "Some of these ingredients, high-quality African tree snake skin, for example, are worth hundreds of galleons an ounce." Ron's eyes went bright at the thought of money. He let his mind wander for a moment, then caught himself. "If I wasn't afraid Professor Snape would turn me into potion ingredients." He trailed off, and the others knew the end of the sentence without him saying it. Harry picked up one of the filled test tubes and smiled. "You probably don't have any medicinal value," he said to Ron. "Professor Snape might decide to feed you to the snakes." Ron shivered at the image. "I hope he doesn't feed me to them alive." Harry popped an empty test tube into the rack, hissed at the nearest snake, and then looked up, trying not to laugh. "They've got specially formulated diets," he relayed. "They don't eat something as smelly as you." Laughter burst out of them, sharp and nervous at first, then freer. The gloomy storage room filled with the sound, the earlier tension finally breaking as snakes and students worked together, and Snape's threat hung in the back of everyone's minds like a distant, unpleasant echo. Loren Morgan, ruthless, profit-minded, and always ready to make the snakes do the work for him, finished processing 2 boxes of serpent venom in no time with their foreman, Harry Potter. He recovered the boxes and lined the test tubes neatly on the shelf, then waited patiently for Snape to return and officially end the detention. Hermione's curiosity had led them into the storeroom, but none of them dared touch anything. Who knew what curses or poisons Snape might have set on the materials? Harry half expected Snape to be thinking along the same lines. Leave the office empty, let them relax and poke around, and then have them drop dead from a perfectly concealed toxin, leaving no evidence. Ron hovered at a safe distance, too curious about the value of the items to keep quiet. "How much is this worth?" he asked. "A demiguised skeleton, maybe a few dozen galleons. Their fur's worth more." "And that? A swooping evil wing? I'm not sure." After a long wait with no sign of Snape, Loren remembered that Snape had left the galleons. Dumbledore had awarded them on the table earlier. He guessed, "We probably don't need to wait for him." Hermione and the others agreed. They couldn't sit in the office forever. They checked the storeroom once more, confirmed nothing had been missed, and left. Ron strode ahead, grinning and tossing the little cloth bag of galleons up and down, listening to the bright clink of metal. It was a simple, genuine happiness. What a night, he thought. Harry was pleased too. No Snape at detention, and the tedious work had been made easy by his parcel tongue. Loren and Hermione trailed behind, walking in companionable silence, the kind where everything could be said but nothing needed to be. The night air was slightly cool and damp. It refreshed them as they walked beneath flickering candlelight. "Are you free tomorrow?" Hermione asked casually. Loren relaxed. "I don't have plans. Why? I want to duel with you for training." "Of course. No problem." They fell into silence again and made their way back to the common room. In a corner, they sat and divided the money. There were 60 galleons in the bag, 10 more than Dumbledore had mentioned, so each of them got 15. Ron, who had to go home at Mrs. Weasley's insistence, imagined the scolding or worse he might get on his return, but thinking of a new wand and the extra galleons, he couldn't stop smiling. The next morning, Hermione led Loren to the room of requirement. Loren grew serious and earnest, insisting they start with the shield charm. It was a spell worth having for life, he said, one that could defend against most curses. After what they'd all experienced, learning the shield charm was a sensible first step. Hermione agreed and decided to begin there. Loren couldn't hide his excitement. He gave a quick, guilty-looking grin. "What?" Hermione asked. He rubbed his cheek. "Nothing. Just," he explained the hand gestures and the correct intonation. Hermione had watched him practice the spell and picked up the details fast. In the dual training space, the two of them set their wands upright and faced one another. Loren's grin became mischief itself, and Hermione felt a flicker of nervousness. She tightened her grip on her wand. "Are you ready?" Loren asked. Hermione inhaled. "I'm ready." "Are you ready?" She answered again, a little more tightly. "I'm ready. Are you ready?" Hermione felt foolish, but stayed on guard. "I'm ready." Then, with perfect timing, Loren yelled, "Petrificus Taulus!" Hermione didn't have time to react. The white jet of the spell hit her, and her body went rigid. She toppled to the floor, hands pressed instinctively to her robes. Loren's plan had worked. Calm on the surface, he crouched down to be at her eye level and pretended to be sorry. "Ah, looks like you weren't ready after all." Hermione stared at him with wide, accusing eyes. If looks could kill, Loren would have been dust. He flicked his wand in a mock, uncharming motion. Once the spell was lifted, Hermione sprang up, furious. Loren looked innocent and almost hurt, sky-blue eyes wide. What did I do wrong? I just asked, "Are you ready?" a few times. Hermione could scarcely find a reason to complain, so she ground her teeth. Again, she demanded. Okay. Loren jumped to his feet cheerfully. They took positions once more. Are you ready? Loren asked. Hermione wanted to hit him with her wand, but restrained herself. Yes. Are you ready? Yes, Petrificus Totalis. Before she could finish, the binding spell struck her, and she collapsed again. Lying on the floor, closed-eyed, Hermione thought, You're dead. You're dead. Loren crouched beside her, and seeing her eyes closed, reached out and flicked her lashes until she opened them. This is part of real combat, he said earnestly. You need to learn to handle sudden spells. His tone was sincere, and it was hard to argue with that. They continued. Loren moved aside and assumed a dueling stance. Are you ready? He called loudly. Hermione adjusted her posture. Yes. With Loren's experience guiding the drills, Hermione avoided many mistakes and, aided by her natural talent, picked up the shield charm faster than expected. She couldn't reliably block his binding spell by the end of the morning, but she came very close to getting the feel of the protective barrier. They agreed to keep practicing in the afternoon. On the walk to the Great Hall for lunch, Loren hummed a little tune and seemed in a very good mood. Are you very happy? Hermione asked. Loren cleared his throat, then announced with mock pomp, I have an important notice. Hermione cocked an eyebrow. Go on. Hermione Granger and Loren Morgan's current record is 22-23, with Mr. Morgan presently in the lead. Chapter 57. Before the Quidditch match Sunday night, Gryffindor Common Room. Loren and Hermione came in from outside and found Harry and Ron surrounded by the rest of the younger students. Ron was talking excitedly, while Harry and the others looked pained, their faces full of resignation. On the table lay a brand new wand. Ron jumped up when he saw Loren and Hermione. Hey, Loren, Hermione, come look at my new wand. Before they could react, the rest of the boys quieted even more at the announcement. Loren and Hermione took seats. Ron beamed. Ollivander picked it out for me himself. It's 14 inches, willow wood, and willow is a very rare wand wood with remarkable healing properties. Harry cut in fast as a tape recorder. Willow wands have lovely grain and are especially good for advanced nonverbal spells. They tend to choose witches and wizards with great potential. Ron scowled. He wanted to continue. Seamus, eager to join in, added, Unicorn tailhair cores usually give the most stable magic with the least chance of fluctuation or blockage. Wands with unicorn hair are least likely to turn to the dark arts. They tend to be very loyal. Ron's mouth fell open, twice robbed of his moment. Hey, it's my wand. Yeah, Harry rubbed his forehead. You've been talking about this for an hour, and you drag everyone who comes in over to listen. You won't let us leave. We can recite it by heart now, Seamus complained. Loren and Hermione couldn't help laughing. Ron, suddenly sheepish, let his swagger go flat. I'm just sharing my joy with you lot. You're my roommates. How many parents' dinners do you owe now? Loren asked, more curious about Ron's predicament than about the wand. That perked Ron up. I can't believe it either. I told Mum and Dad everything. They weren't cross, just wanted to know if I was all right. Every parent gets angry when their child gets into trouble, but they worry more when their child is in danger. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley weren't really angry. They were relieved Ron was safe. Ron brightened. Mum wants us all to come to the Burrow for the summer holidays. She wants to properly thank everyone, especially Harry and Loren. Harry and Hermione were tempted. The Burrow was a pure-blood wizard family's home, which intrigued them. Loren, too, was curious about the Burrow. They quickly agreed. With Ron's trouble taken care of, the group relaxed and conversation branched out. Harry mentioned Quidditch. On the third Saturday of November, he would play his first match, Gryffindor versus Slytherin. We haven't won the cup in 4 years, he said, and Wood's been feeling bad for the old team. Hermione remembered a picture of Professor McGonagall cheering on the pitch. The house must have been strong in Quidditch once. Harry thought of his father's award as best seeker and wanted to be like him. Ron was relaxed. Don't worry, Harry. This year we've got 2 Nimbus 2000s, and with you catching the snitch, the cup's ours. Harry sighed. That confidence from everyone put pressure on him. After November began, Wood turned 3 nights of weekly practice into Harry being dragged to the pitch whenever Wood could snag someone. He had no free time all week. Loren remembered the match in which Quirrell cursed Harry, leaving him barely able to fly, surviving with the help of Snape and Hermione, and then catching the snitch. One unanswered question nagged him. If Snape knew it was Quirrell, why didn't he confront Quirrell directly instead of casting a countercurse? Loren couldn't find a satisfying answer. He only thought maybe it had been sudden and Snape didn't have proof. Dismissing it for the moment, he brought up another concern. "You said you've been dragged to practice all week and haven't had a minute to yourself?" Loren asked Harry. Harry nodded. "That's right. Why?" Loren's eyes flicked between Harry and Ron. "Before that, can you two imitate a troll's roar?" The question was odd. Ron hesitated. "I think so." Loren straightened, leaned close, and whispered, "Did you two do your transfiguration homework?" Harry and Ron's faces went pale. They'd both sworn to themselves. After catching up on sleep, the first thing they would do was finish their transfiguration homework and never stay up late to do it again. Neither of them had done it. They exchanged a look that said, "Who remembers homework after getting some sleep?" Loren made an exaggerated show of adjusting an invisible tie, sat back, and made a small gesture. "Please perform." Roar. Neville, who wasn't great with memories, had a habit of keeping a diary and wrote down the day before he went to bed. November 10th, 1991, Sunday. Cloudy. My 2 roommates are still copying transfiguration homework. They call it referencing. I don't understand why people with bad memories like me still remember to do their homework, but they always leave it until bedtime. Don't learn this habit. They promised they would never do this again, which is why I heard a troll roar. Very interesting. Monday, Transfiguration Classroom. Class was over, and students packed up. Loren approached Professor McGonagall as she straightened the podium books. "Professor, may I ask a favor?" "Speak," she said without looking up. She knew Loren was not an easy child to handle. "I'd like to be a Quidditch commentator," he said. He wanted the best spot to watch. McGonagall stacked a few books. "The commentator has already been chosen, Lee Jordan. There will be no change." Loren hurried to keep up. "I can work with him. I'll do it with him." "There's no need." McGonagall began to leave, not wanting to be talked into something. Loren tugged her sleeve and put on an innocent, earnest look. "I'm from a Muggle family. I just want to get closer to my fellow students. I promise I won't cause trouble." McGonagall hesitated. She tried to decide if this was another attempted prank, but Loren had behaved well in class. "Come to my office tomorrow night," she said finally. "I'll test you on some Quidditch rules. If you pass, you may help with the commentary." "Of course." Loren ran off, elated. That evening at dinner, Loren sat beside Harry and asked if there was a quick way to learn Quidditch rules. Harry said he'd learned by being on the team. He picked up rules every time he committed a foul. He'd learned over 100 that way, but he couldn't explain them quickly. He could only show what constituted a foul. Loren shook his head vehemently. "I want to be a commentator, not a player. You lot break arms and legs playing. I don't want to experience every foul." Hermione, overhearing, suggested a book. "Perhaps you could read Quidditch Through the Ages." Loren was surprised. He'd thought Hermione didn't care much for Quidditch. "You read books on Quidditch?" "It's an interesting book. You can read it like a story." She didn't mention Professor McGonagall had recommended Quidditch reading. With Madame Pince's help, Loren found the book in the library. It read like a reference, but also like a history. The game's origin in Quidditch Marsh, the witch Gertie Kettle's diary describing early matches, the creation of the quaffle and the goals, the appearance of flying stones that became bludgers, and the gradual fixing of the rules into the form they now knew. Loren learned the team composition: 7 players, 1 keeper, 3 chasers, 2 beaters, and 1 seeker, and the 4 balls used: the quaffle, 2 bludgers, and the golden snitch. Chasers score 10 points with the quaffle. The keeper defends and can join the attack. Beaters handle bludgers with bats. The seeker catches the snitch for 150 points. Without a caught snitch, the game cannot end. The book even mentioned a game that once lasted 3 months with players taking shifts. Loren skimmed the book, then brought it back to the common room and later to his dorm, determined to cram the rules. He quickly familiarized himself with common fouls and the basic history. Flamel scolded him good-naturedly for not studying more seriously all the time. The next morning, Loren woke with a slight headache, shuffled to the window, and breathed the cold, fresh air until he felt awake. Please follow along. Also, thanks to Cupsen for the reward. It's truly touching for a new, struggling author. It was breakfast at the Gryffindor table. Harry picked up a piece of bread with more effort than usual, bit it, chewed for a long time, and then set it back down untouched. After one more useless attempt, he pushed it around his plate with his knife and fork. Everyone could see how downcast he was. It was as if a shadow clung to him. "Eat something, Harry," Ron said at last, unable to watch him any longer. Harry sighed and forced himself to chew and swallow a mouthful. "I've got 3 classes today, 3 assignments, and Quidditch practice tonight," he said. "Just thinking about it makes me feel breathless." "Professor Sprout won't give you too much," Hermione said, trying to ease him, "and Flitwick's and Binns' assignments aren't due until next week. Relax a bit." Loren said with his mouth full, slurring the words. Seeing him like that made Hermione's hands twitch. The concern from his friends, though, made Harry feel a little lighter. "It's not just the assignments," Harry went on. "It's Quidditch. I'm basically a beginner, and Woods put all his hopes on me. I don't even know how a real match is supposed to go." Loren swallowed, reached over, and slapped a battered book onto the table. "You're in luck," he announced. "This has everything: origins, rules, famous matches. Since you're a mate, I won't charge you." He thumped the spine. "Quidditch through the ages." Harry ignored Loren's theatrical aside, took the book, and began to read. He was absorbed within minutes. Hermione glanced at the title and then at Loren. She'd recommended the book to him yesterday and was impressed he'd already got a handle on it. Loren, meanwhile, kept eating, oblivious to her look. After herbology that morning, Loren had gone to Professor McGonagall's office. She hadn't made things difficult, just asked a few questions about scoring rules before giving him a note and telling him to take it to Lee Jordan. Before he left, she fixed him with a gentler look than he'd expected. "I know your story about family and friends was to persuade me," she said. "Even if Gryffindor students are mischievous, they're still my students. There's no place for pure blood or muggle squabbling here. You've got a good group of friends, Loren." "I understand, Professor," he said, a little taken aback. Then her face hardened back to the familiar sternness. "But if you cause trouble during the match, I'll turn you into a quaffle." "No problem, Professor." Loren patted his chest. He wasn't planning any real mischief, just a bit of lively commentary. November had settled in, and winter was closing around Hogwarts. The lake had already frozen. Mornings brought thick frost to the windows, and the surrounding hills were dusted white. Hagrid, wrapped in a moleskin coat, rabbit fur gloves, and beaver fur boots, was a permanent fixture on the Quidditch pitch, de-icing brooms. Fireplaces burned in every common room and corridor, making the castle warm to the touch. Inside it was comfortable, though after a while the rooms could feel stuffy. Professors used a gusting whirlwind sweep charm before lessons to freshen the air, but students still preferred to go outside to clear their heads, out on the lawns or in the courtyards. The Weasley twins loudly swore the freshest air was at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, and a few older students taught the first years a version of the flame freezing charm. The spell produced small, blue, fuel-free flames that floated in the air and gave off gentle warmth without burning. Girls tucked a handful into honey jars as both a pretty trinket and a portable heater. When Loren first saw them, he thought they were will-o'-the-wisps. When he learned they could keep burning sealed in a jar, he was quietly impressed. Combustion materials, oxidizers, ignition sources, magic made all those rules irrelevant. On Friday, the day before the match, Loren, Hermione, Harry, and Ron gathered around a cluster of those blue flames in the courtyard. Hermione and Loren were working on assignments, occasionally adding notes and amendments. Loren would scribble down ideas and hand them in as if the messy draft showed his thought process. Hermione recopied everything neatly in perfect handwriting. Harry and Ron were more inclined to use Hermione's work as a guide when Hermione would allow it. Ron played with one of the tiny blue flames like it was a dandelion seed. He'd puff it upward and watch it drift, then blow from below to set it rising again. The delicate flickers looked like blue butterflies, and Ron was utterly absorbed. Harry, meanwhile, had his head buried in Quidditch through the ages. He didn't really care about the 700 listed fouls. The anecdotes were the best part. He laughed at the idea that all 700 fouls had appeared in the 1473 World Cup. He was pleased to read that Seekers tended to be the smallest and fastest players. It suited him, and shook his head when he read that most serious Quidditch accidents befell Seekers. Matches rarely ended in death, but referees did sometimes turn up missing, only to be found months later in strange places. Harry read and chuckled to himself. It was a small relief from the pressure of the coming days. Many friends had said the title "Muggle Life is Precious" sounded off, so I changed it "Days Blending In at Hogwarts." The main point is to behave yourself. 59. A wonderful misunderstanding. Loren finished his homework in a hurry and with Ron started blowing a ball of blue flame back and forth. With their faces tilted up, they took turns puffing, passing the little fire between them like two foolish dogs with a toy. Hermione slid the revised manuscript into her book, planning to finish the transcription over the weekend. She watched the two idiots playing with fire, then glanced at Harry sitting beside them, occasionally snorting at something in his book. A sharp sense of exasperation tightened in her chest. What was she going to do? These friends of hers were hopelessly odd. "Loren, how did your chat with Lee Jordan go?" Hermione tried to change the subject. "Phew." Loren didn't stop passing the flame. "Lee says commentary is all improv." "You can't predict how a match will go, so you can't practice it," Ron put in. Loren nodded as if that proved everything. Then, in that bizarre, grandiose way of his, he added, "It all starts at the commentary booth. And then, before you know it, you end up something else entirely. The kind of thing that can take on gods and saints." Hermione didn't understand a word of it, but she grasped the point. Loren did whatever he found amusing. She felt a tiny wetness on the back of her hand and looked down in disgust. One of Loren's stray droplets of spittle had landed there. "Enough!" Hermione's temples throbbed. She flicked her wand, snuffed the blue flame, and put it back in its jar. "Why on earth do you want to be a commentator?" Ron's curiosity matched hers. From everything she'd seen, Loren wasn't a good flyer and hated Quidditch. Loren gave her a look that said, "You wouldn't get it." Nearby, Harry suddenly burst into laughter at something in his book, looking incongruously silly. Loren and Ron shifted uncomfortably, ready to tell him off, when Professor Snape appeared in the corridor. He limped as he walked, one leg bowed, his robes hitched, and he only spared a glance at the book in Harry's hands before his dark eyes fixed on the Slytherin's scarlet and gold. "What do you have there?" Snape asked, the way he always did, with his gaze stopping on Harry's green eyes like a needle. Harry closed the book and handed it over without a word. "Quidditch Through the Ages." Snape's mouth tightened. "Library books are not allowed outside the castle," he said. 5 points from Gryffindor. Before they could react, Snape turned to Loren. "You need not come to my office tonight." Then he limped off with the book under his arm. The four watched his back until he disappeared. "He just made up a rule," Harry protested. Hermione's eyes tracked his gait. "What happened to Professor Snape's leg?" "I don't know, but he must be in a lot of pain," Ron said with a small, guilty smile. Loren smacked his lips, thinking. Dumbledore had finally been caught out. The old dog in the story only ever managed to inconvenience Snape. They let the topic drop and moved on. Back in the common room, it buzzed with talk of tomorrow's Quidditch match. Hermione sat between Harry and Ron by the window, checking their charms homework. She refused to let them outright copy. Loren's answers were barely legible, full of doodles and guesses. They decided to do the easy questions themselves, scribble plausible answers for the rest, and have Hermione correct them later. It was quicker than decoding Loren's handwriting. Harry, though, couldn't concentrate. The match sat heavy in his stomach, and the confiscated Quidditch book gnawed at him. He pulled at threads of anger until it flared. Why should Snape get to take his book? It would have been easy to put up a fuss, but Harry decided to try something bolder. If another professor were around, Snape wouldn't be able to be so officious. He stood up. "I'm going to ask Professor Snape for my book back. Want to come?" Ron's face said, "Are you mad?" Hermione shook her head. "I'll go by myself," Harry said and left. The cooler air outside cleared his head a little. He nearly turned back, embarrassed by the bravado, but pressed on and headed for the staff common room. Down in the dungeons, Loren found himself walking to Snape's office, even though Snape had told him not to come. Maybe it was the wolfsbane potion Snape had helped him brew, or a genuine interest in deeper potions theory. Or maybe the weekly Friday conversations made him feel less like a student and more like someone Snape tolerated. Whatever it was, he knocked and pushed the door open. Snape was at his desk, grading papers, looking grim. "I told you not to come tonight," he said, voice sharper than usual. Loren stopped. He didn't really know why he'd come. "I came to see you, Professor." After a long, heavy look, Snape snapped. "Didn't he only treat superficial wounds? It won't help deep damage. Do you think I don't know that? Do you think I, of all people, would recommend something useless?" The words poured out of Snape like a burst of cold metal, angrier than the situation demanded. Loren didn't get riled. He'd seen worse insults online in another life. The room went quiet. For a moment, Snape's face softened, as if the sudden surge of anger had caught him off guard. He closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge. "I'm sorry, I lost my composure." Loren, who didn't know what else to do, suggested, "Do you want me to fetch Madame Pomfrey?" Snape leaned back in his chair. "No, Filch has brought me a potion. Help me to the staff common room so we can apply it." Harry had come up to the staff common room and knocked at the door, only to get no answer. If Snape had left his book inside, that would have been perfect luck. He pushed the door ajar and peered in. The sight inside made his stomach drop. Professor Snape sat with one leg exposed, robes hitched above his knee. The flesh was bloody and torn, and Filch knelt beside him, pressing bandages to the wound. Loren stood a few feet away watching. Snape hissed as Filch tightened the bandage. "How was I to defend against 3 heads at once?" he muttered. "How could I have known?" Harry's pupils shrank. Cerberus. The memory hit him. At Halloween, something had been guarded that nobody could reach because of that terrible 3-headed dog. If Snape had tried to get past Cerberus, he must have been after whatever it was guarding. The thought spun his insides. "Potter!" Snape snapped, spinning to cover his leg with his robe. Harry didn't wait to be asked out. He turned and fled up the stairs, running all the way back to the common room. "Did you get the book?" Ron demanded when Harry burst in, panting. Harry calmed, lowered his voice, and told them everything. Snape's leg, Filch, Loren, and Snape's muttered line about 3 heads. "He must have tried to get past Cerberus on Halloween," Harry said. "He was looking for whatever the dog was guarding." "He let the troll in to distract people," Ron said, making a guess. Hermione's eyes went wide. "I know he's not the nicest, but a professor wouldn't steal something Dumbledore was guarding so carefully. You always assume professors can do no wrong," Ron shot back. "I reckon Snape's capable of anything." Hermione bit her lip, thinking fast. Harry said Loren was there too. Maybe we should ask him. "Loren saved our lives," Ron said. "It'd be wrong to suspect him. But Snape could have put a spell on him. Who knows? He goes to Snape's office every Friday. They could be up to anything." Hermione's face flushed. She couldn't accuse Loren of hiding things. His being a werewolf felt like his private business, but the idea of Snape pressing him did make sense. If Snape was blackmailing Loren over wolfsbane, Loren might pretend to help while actually doing nothing. The theory began to seem to explain everything, and she decided she needed to talk to Loren alone. They didn't know that what they'd feared about Snape and had conjured up about Loren were tangled imaginings spun from a single glimpse. No one asked Loren for the truth. A wonderful misunderstanding took root among the 4 of them that night. Harry lay awake for a long time, his mind buzzing with the questions, unable to sleep. No way, no way. No way, no way. Now entering the Quidditch team for Gryffindor. Loren's voice was full of passion, the true voice of a dedicated commentator. On a high platform overlooking the pitch, he and Lee Jordan sat beside Professor McGonagall. The commentary went out under her strict eye, which was why she had allowed Loren to have a go. He couldn't cause any real trouble. "What you're seeing now is the youngest seeker in history, Harry Potter." Except for the Slytherins, every house cheered and applauded. The roar from the Gryffindor stands carried all the way around the stadium. Harry's cheeks were pink from the cold. Beside him is the Gryffindor captain, the keeper, Oliver Wood. Wood, the handsome jock, drew a wave of enthusiastic cheers from the girls. Loren introduced the chasers in turn, Katie Bell, Angelina Johnson, and Alicia Spinnet. And finally, the beaters, the Weasley twins, George and Fred. The twins circled the field in perfect sync, posing like celebrities, waving and blowing kisses to the crowd. Professor McGonagall looked at the introductions with approval. At least the atmosphere was livelier. When Loren finished the Gryffindor lineup, Lee Jordan took up the microphone for Slytherin. In front of them, the Slytherin team, he said flatly, "I'll hand things over to the referee, Madam Hooch." The Slytherin players were livid. They'd planned some dramatic flying to announce themselves, but Lee had just brushed them off with a single sentence. In the Slytherin stands, a group led by Malfoy shouted, "This is rigged! Rigged!" Most of the other students found the contrast hilarious. Every Gryffindor had been introduced with flair. Slytherin barely got a word. "That's brilliant," Seamus giggled, practically falling onto Hagrid. The giant shook with laughter, his beard wobbling. Professor McGonagall, despite herself, looked nervous to meet Snape's eyes from across the staff stands. This really wasn't my doing, she thought, though she couldn't help smiling. Madam Hooch blew her silver whistle and 15 brooms rose into the air. "The quaffle has been taken by Gryffindor's Angelina Johnson. She's an excellent chaser," Lee called, admiring Angelina's form. "Just look at her posture. So agile, so graceful." Professor McGonagall ignored the first part, but bristled when he began to gush. "Jordan," she snapped. Lee grinned and said, "Sorry, Professor." Loren picked up the thread. "Angelina slips past them, but she's cornered by Slytherin. Those despicable scoundrels, do they only know how to gang up on people?" McGonagall merely shot him a warning glance. Angelina threaded the quaffle through a human wall. "Lovely. It goes to Alicia Spinnet. The Slytherin lot can't even get near the quaffle's backside." "Loren," McGonagall hissed again. "I'm sorry, Professor," he answered. Lee kept up a steadier tone. "Alicia passes. Oh, Marcus Flint, Slytherin's captain, has the quaffle." No way, Loren added. "He doesn't think he can score from there, does he?" There was nothing explicitly rude about the words, but in Loren's peculiar delivery, they gnawed at people. Seamus and Ron at the edge of the stands brightened when they heard it. So simple and so inviting to repeat. Flint felt his temper prick at the insult and let fly a long, obvious shot from well outside the scoring area. The trajectory was easy to read. Wood made the save without trouble, a routine block. "Now Katie Bell has it. She passes to Angelina," Lee called. "Angelina's heading toward the Slytherin goal. She's up and down the pitch, ready to take the shot at any moment." Loren couldn't resist. "Keeper Bletch looks like a pumpkin. Can he possibly guess where the ball's going?" Bletch, hovering in goal, heard the taunt. He rose higher. "Why is he going up? Even a pumpkin head would know Angelina wouldn't shoot from above." He swooped down. "Down now. What a stupid decision. A troll would be a better keeper than him." Bletch's face went red. He was furious. Angelina seized the opening and fired. Clang! Clang! The quaffle hit the hoop and dropped through. Goal. Cheers exploded across the cold air. Angelina high-fived her teammates, grinning. "Honestly, it feels like a fence is easier," Loren said, voice triumphant. The Slytherins glared. "Gryffindor scores." "I've seen trolls," Loren continued. "If I say he's not as good as a troll, then he's not as good as a troll." The line carried across the stadium. Seamus found it the funniest thing he'd heard all day and doubled up laughing into Hagrid's belly. "Loren really has seen a troll," he howled. "Rigged. Rigged." Malfoy yelled again. McGonagall, finally exasperated, put a hand on Loren's arm and warned him more firmly. The match grew rougher. Slytherin players grew agitated and began to kick at opponents' brooms and swing their beater bats dangerously close. Small fouls at angles Madam Hooch couldn't quite see and therefore couldn't penalize. Angelina was almost knocked off her broom several times. The cheers in the stands quieted and turned into gasps. Hermione frowned. Quidditch really was barbaric. "These scoundrels," she muttered. "Slytherins know better than trolls. Trolls at least hit people with sticks honestly." Professor McGonagall's lips were pressed thin, but she still allowed the commentary to continue. Lee had been doing much of the play-by-play. Loren was indulging his sharper barbs. The crowd's mood tightened. Both sides were getting angrier. Loren, who'd started out on a whim just to get a reaction, felt a sudden worry that if he kept goading the other side, a proper brawl might break out on the pitch. Slytherin's aggression escalated. Harry dodged bludgers more than once. Wood shouted for him to back off and only rejoin the chase if he could spot the golden snitch. As Harry wheeled to avoid another bludger, his broom lurched wildly, and for a terrifying moment, he seemed to lose control. Loren wasn't worried. Dumbledore sat close to the pitch, and he suspected that even without Snape or an officious Quirrell muttering curses, Harry would be safe. Then a small commotion in the faculty stands, someone's cloak catching and a brief flicker of flame drew attention away. Quirrell's muttering broke off in the distraction. In the midst of the chaos, Harry steadied himself, spotted the glint of the snitch, and at last snatched it from the air. Victory for Gryffindor. Jubilation erupted among the Gryffindor students. The players circled Harry, cheering. Seamus and Dean gathered a group of younger students around the Slytherin section and began to chant, copying Loren. "No way, no way. You didn't think you could win, did you?" They'd learned the phrase from Loren and found it unexpectedly powerful. That simple line, with its mocking tone, seemed to suck the good temper out of Slytherin and funnel it back into Gryffindor delight. The sourer the Slytherins' faces grew, the better the Gryffindors felt, like some delicious treat. The pleasure fed on itself, and the mockery grew louder until the Slytherins' expressions were positively wretched. Loren had no idea yet that the little chant he'd invented would spread through Hogwarts like wildfire.